The chapel smelled of pine and old regret. Colonel Jack Sullivan stood at the back, spine rigid in his dress blues, ribbons earned across 3 decades forming a colorful testament to survival. 28 years of service, 14 memorial services. Each one felt like swallowing broken glass. But this one was different. This one was Daniel. The morning sun cut through stained glass windows, painting the casket in fractured light. Empty, of course. They always were when the body stayed lost in cold water. Jack's jaw worked as he stared at the folded flag resting where his protege should have been. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Hayes, 41 years old, father of 2, the best damn pilot Jack had ever trained. Gone. Rebecca Hayes sat in the front row, her spine too straight, her hands too still. She wore black well but wore grief poorly, the kind that hadn't yet learned to breathe. Her son Michael, 10 years old, sat beside her, holding the ceremonial flag with white-knuckled reverence. The boy kept glancing at the empty casket like he expected his father to climb out, brushing off death like turbulence. Jack understood the impulse. He'd been doing the same thing for 4 weeks. Chaplain Morrison's voice droned through platitudes about service and sacrifice, words polished smooth from overuse. Jack stopped listening. He'd heard these eulogies before, had delivered a few himself. They never said what mattered. They never said how a man's last words crackled over a failing radio, or how the rescue helicopters found nothing but oil slicks and silence. The sound of boots on tile pulled Jack from the spiral. Brigadier General Marcus Hayes moved down the center aisle, the man's dress uniform sharp enough to cut glass. 67 years old and still carried himself like the fighter pilot he'd been in Vietnam. 3 years as a prisoner of war had carved something permanent into his face, something harder than bone. Daniel's father. Marcus took his seat beside Rebecca without touching her, without acknowledging the grandchildren who bore his name. His face could have been carved from Arctic ice. No tears, no tremor in his hands, just that 1,000-yard stare that Jack recognized from the mirror. The look of men who'd learned that feeling too much was a tactical liability. The service ended with taps played on a brass bugle, each note hanging in the air like an accusation. Jack stayed standing as others filed past, offering Rebecca words that meant nothing and everything. When she reached him, her composure finally cracked. "You trained him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You taught him everything." Jack's throat constricted. "Not everything, ma'am. Not enough." She searched his face for something, absolution maybe, then moved on. Michael paused, looked up at Jack with his father's eyes. "Will you find him?" the boy asked. The question hit like a missile strike. Jack crouched down, bringing himself level with the child. "Your dad was the best pilot I ever knew," he said quietly. "If anyone could survive what happened out there, it was him." The words tasted like lies. The Bering Sea in February didn't forgive, didn't negotiate, didn't leave survivors floating for 4 weeks. But the boy nodded, satisfied with the kindness of uncertainty, and followed his mother into the Arctic morning. Jack straightened, turned to find Marcus Hayes standing 3 feet away. The general's eyes held no grief, just calculation, the kind of cold assessment that Jack had seen in commanders who'd learned to count bodies like chess pieces. "Walk with me, Colonel," Marcus said. It wasn't a request. They moved through the chapel's side exit, out into the kind of February cold that burned exposed skin. Elmendorf Richardson sprawled before them, F-22 Raptors lined up on the distant flight line like sleeping predators. The mountains beyond wore fresh snow, indifferent and eternal. "I need you to let him go," Marcus said without preamble. Jack kept his eyes on the mountains. "Sir?" "My son is dead, Sullivan. Has been for 4 weeks. The sooner you accept that, the better." Something in the general's tone raised the hair on Jack's neck. The words were right, but the delivery was surgical, clinical, like he was discussing acceptable losses in a war game. "With respect, General, I was there when the distress call came in. Daniel was still transmitting when he went down. And now he's not transmitting at all." Marcus turned to face him fully. "I know you two were close. I know you see him as the son you never had. But sentiment doesn't change reality." Jack felt heat rise despite the cold. "My reality, sir, is that we left a man behind. Your reality is that you have 60 days until retirement." Marcus's voice dropped to something quiet and dangerous. 60 days to collect your pension and whatever's left of your peace. Don't waste them chasing ghosts." The general walked away before Jack could respond, his boots crunching on frozen ground with the rhythm of a man who'd learned to march through prisoner camps and never stopped. Jack stood alone in the cold, watching contrails from a training flight etch white lines across blue sky. Somewhere up there, young pilots were learning the skills that kept them alive. The same skills he'd taught Daniel 15 years ago, back when the kid was a lieutenant with more courage than sense. The memory surfaced unbidden. Daniel's first carrier landing, the kid so nervous he nearly put his F-18 through the stern. Jack had talked him down over the radio, voice calm even as his own hands sweated. Afterward, Daniel had found him in the ready room. "How do you do that?" the young pilot had asked. "Stay so cool when everything's going to hell?" Jack had considered the question, decided on honesty. "I don't. I just learned to lie convincingly." They'd laughed about it, shared a drink, started a friendship that outlasted deployments and assignments. Jack had been best man at Daniel's wedding, had held Michael when the boy was 3 days old, had listened when Daniel's marriage hit rough patches, when the weight of command started grinding him down, had sent him on the mission that killed him. The thought was a familiar knife. Jack had been in operations 4 weeks ago when the tasking came down. Intelligence sweep along the air defense identification zone, routine collection on new Russian radar systems. The mission profile was standard, risk assessment low. Jack had reviewed the brief, signed off on it, sent Daniel north in disguise that swallowed him whole. He hadn't slept properly since. The officers' club that evening smelled of whiskey and forced camaraderie. Jack sat alone at the bar, coffee growing cold in front of him. He'd given up drinking 3 years ago when his wife died, when he realized bourbon was becoming a crutch he couldn't afford. PTSD didn't mix well with alcohol, the therapist had said. Jack had nodded, poured out every bottle in the house, learned to cope with nightmares sober. The nightmares were worse that way, but at least he remembered them. "Colonel Sullivan, sir?" Jack turned to find Captain Ben Cooper standing at attention, still in flight suit, helmet bag slung over one shoulder. 29 years old, MIT aerospace engineering degree, reflexes like a fighter jet. The kid represented everything new in military aviation, all technology and precision, none of the old warrior instinct that Jack's generation carried like shrapnel. "At ease, Captain, you flying tonight?" "Just landed, sir. Night currency training." Ben hesitated, then slid onto the stool beside Jack. "Sir, I wanted to say, about Colonel Hayes, the words died. Jack understood. There was no grammar for this kind of loss. "You fly good tonight?" Jack asked, steering them toward safer ground. "Yes, sir. Passed all parameters." Ben's fingers drummed the bar, nervous energy, looking for an outlet. "Sir, can I ask you something?" "Shoot." "Everyone says you and Colonel Hayes were tight, that you trained him from the beginning." The young captain's eyes held genuine curiosity. What was he like? Before he was, a legend? Jack considered his cold coffee, decided honesty served better than hagiography. "He was terrified," Jack said. "First time I took him up for combat maneuvering, he pulled so many G's, he nearly blacked out. Came back pale as a ghost, hands shaking. I thought maybe he wasn't cut out for fighters." "What changed?" Jack smiled at the memory. He went up again, and again. Flew every day for 2 months straight until the fear became background noise. That's what made him good, Captain, not talent, courage, the kind that shows up even when you're scared. Ben absorbed this, nodded slowly. "That's why you're here, isn't it? At the bar with coffee, instead of home. You're scared he's still out there." The observation was too accurate. Jack set down his cup carefully. "I'm here because I'm old and stubborn and I don't sleep well," he said. "Don't read poetry into it." But he didn't deny it. The club started filling with younger pilots, voices loud with the immortality of men who hadn't lost enough yet. Jack recognized the type. He'd been that type once before Desert Storm taught him that skill and luck were different currencies. He left before the noise became unbearable, walked across the frozen base toward his quarters. The Northern Lights had started their nightly performance, green curtains shimmering against infinite black, beautiful and indifferent, like everything else in Alaska. His phone buzzed. A text from his son David, currently deployed with the Marines somewhere in Syria. "Heard about Daniel. You okay, Dad?" Jack stared at the message, typed and deleted 3 responses before settling on the truth. "No, but I will be." The lie tasted familiar. His quarters were standard officer housing, sparse and functional. Jack had never been good at making places feel like home. His wife had handled that, filling spaces with warmth and color, and the kind of small touches that made concrete walls feel human. After she died, he'd packed away most of it, unable to look at her choices without bleeding. Now the walls were bare except for a single photograph. Jack and Daniel in flight suits, standing in front of an F-22, both grinning like they'd just gotten away with something. Taken 6 years ago during red flag exercises in Nevada. They'd won every engagement that week. Flew like they shared one brain. Jack touched the frame, then turned away. Sleep came hard and left quickly. At 02:30, he gave up, pulled on his flight suit, and headed for the squadron building. Night flying was his therapy, had been since the nightmares started. Something about being alone at altitude, nothing but stars and engine noise, quieted the noise in his head. The duty officer barely looked up when Jack signed out an F-22. Solo night currency flight, weather check, standard profiles. All true, all carefully incomplete. Jack wasn't checking weather, he was checking coordinates. The same coordinates where Daniel's emergency beacon had gone silent 4 weeks ago. The pre-flight was muscle memory, hands moving through checks while his mind wandered. The F-22 Raptor was a 40-year-old design now, but still the most lethal fighter ever built. Stealth, supercruise, sensor fusion that made the pilot feel omniscient. Jack had been flying them since they were experimental, back when people still argued about whether stealth mattered. It mattered. Tower Reaper 1, request clearance for departure. Reaper 1 Tower, winds 270 at 15, altimeter 3012, cleared for takeoff runway 06. The twin Pratt & Whitney engines spooled up with a sound like controlled fury. Jack released brakes, felt 20 tons of aircraft leap forward, rotation speed coming fast. Nose up, wheels up, Alaska falling away below. He climbed through scattered clouds into a sky so clear it hurt to look at. The northern lights were in full display tonight, solar winds painting atmosphere in shades that had no names. Jack had seen them 1,000 times, still couldn't quite believe they were real. He leveled at Angels 35,000 feet, pointed the nose northwest, toward Russia, toward the last known position of Prophet 1, call sign for a pilot who should have been drinking beer and teaching his son to throw a baseball. The ocean below was black and restless, broken ice reflecting starlight like scattered diamonds. Beautiful and lethal. Jack had done survival training in these waters once, back when he was young enough to think he was invincible. They'd lasted 11 minutes before hypothermia made thinking impossible. Rescue came at 13 minutes. Another 60 seconds and the medics said they'd have been pulling corpses. Daniel had gone down alone. No rescue, no hope. Jack flew the pattern anyway, eyes scanning instruments for ghosts. Radar showed nothing but ocean. Radio offered only static. The emergency beacon frequencies stayed silent, same as they'd been for 28 days. He dropped roses into the darkness. Same ritual he'd performed for every wingman he'd lost. Watched them tumble away, red petals against black water, gone in seconds. "I'm sorry, kid," he said to the empty cockpit. "Should have trusted my gut. Should have scrubbed the mission." The words disappeared into static and engine noise, meaningless as prayer. He was about to turn back when the radio crackled. At first, Jack thought it was interference, solar radiation playing tricks with electronics. The northern lights did that sometimes, made equipment misbehave in ways that defied troubleshooting. But then it came again, clearer. A voice, faint, distorted, impossible. "Reaper 1, this is Prophet. Do you copy?" Jack's hands locked on the stick. His heart tried to climb out through his throat. Every rational part of his brain screamed that this was fatigue, stress, wishful thinking made audible. Dead men didn't broadcast. Physics didn't negotiate. But the voice came again, and this time there was no mistaking it. "Reaper 1, this is Prophet. Jack, please respond. I'm 340 miles northwest, Angels 28, fuel critical. I have 6 bandits on my 6 and I'm coming home." Jack's training kicked in before his emotions could paralyze him. His right hand moved to the radio, muscle memory overriding disbelief. "Prophet, Reaper 1, authenticate Delta November." The pause lasted 3 heartbeats. Long enough for doubt to creep back in. Long enough for Jack to wonder if he'd finally cracked. If 30 years of accumulated trauma had found a creative new way to break him. Then Daniel's voice came back, stronger now. "Authentication Tango Whiskey. Jack, it's really me. Elmendorf Tower. I'm inbound, extreme fuel state, hostile aircraft in pursuit. Request immediate assistance." Jack's radar was already sweeping, searching. There. 7 contacts, bearing 315, range 240 miles. 1 aircraft flying alone, 6 more in pursuit formation. The single contact had no IFF transponder, no identification friend or foe signal, just a radar return moving fast and low. The Elmendorf controller's voice cut in, professional but strained. Reaper 1 Tower, we're tracking the contact. Be advised, voice authentication shows 94% probability match to Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, but sir, that's impossible. Hayes was declared KK-1A 28 days ago. Jack's hands were shaking now, adrenaline flooding his system in ways that hadn't happened since combat. He forced his voice to stay level. Prophet, Reaper 1, tell me something only you and I know. Something that can't be faked. Another pause. Jack could hear breathing on the other end, ragged and exhausted. August 2019, Daniel said. Your birthday. You got drunk, first time I ever saw you lose control. You told me about Sandstorm 6, your wingman in Desert Storm, the one who died because you followed the abort order. You said you'd never let that happen again. You made me promise I'd never tell anyone. The memory hit like a gut punch. Jack had spent 34 years trying to forget that night, that confession, the weight of a promise he'd already broken once. Only Daniel knew. Only Daniel had been there in Jack's kitchen at 2 in the morning, watching a man twice his age cry over decisions made 3 decades prior. It was him. It was really him. Elmendorf Tower, this is Reaper 1. I can authenticate. That's our pilot. Before the tower could respond, another voice cut across the frequency. Cold, authoritative, unmistakable. Reaper 1, this is Warlock Actual. Return to base immediately. That is a direct order. General Marcus Hayes. Jack felt ice settle into his chest. Something in the general's tone was wrong, too controlled, too precise. Sir, voice authentication confirms this is Lieutenant Colonel Hayes. He's inbound with hostiles in pursuit. Negative, Sullivan. Marcus's voice carried the weight of absolute command. That is a Russian psychological operation using synthetic voice technology. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes was killed in action 4 weeks ago. The aircraft you're tracking is hostile. Do not engage. Do not assist. RTB immediately. Jack's mind raced. Synthetic voice tech was getting good. Everyone knew that. Deepfakes could fool biometrics. But the details Daniel had shared, the specific memory, that couldn't be faked. Not that precisely. Not with that much emotional weight. Unless Daniel had been captured. Unless they tortured the information out of him. The thought made Jack's stomach turn. Dad? Daniel's voice again, and this time Jack heard the desperation. Dad, it's me. Please, you have to believe me. Marcus Hayes' response was immediate and brutal. Whoever you are, using my son's voice is an act of war. Cease transmission immediately. The frequency went silent. Then quietly, Daniel spoke again, addressing Jack directly. Jack, please. I don't have much time. Fuel's almost gone. They've been chasing me for 3 days. I have intelligence, critical intelligence, about an operation targeting Alaska. But if I don't get home, if you don't help me, people are going to die. Americans are going to die. Jack's tactical display updated. The 6 pursuing aircraft were closing fast. Flanking formation. Professional. Aggressive. His radar signature library identified them as Sukhoi Su-35 flankers, Russian 4th-generation fighters. Top-of-the-line equipment. Not the kind of assets Russia deployed for routine patrols. Tower, what's the ROE? Jack asked. Rules of engagement were critical. One wrong move, and he could start a war. The tower controller sounded uncertain. Sir, Warlock Actual has ordered all USAF assets to RTB. 4 F-15ES are scrambling from Eielson to intercept the unknown aircraft. ETA 12 minutes. 12 minutes. Jack did the math instantly. With 6 fighters in pursuit and fuel running out, Daniel wouldn't last 12 minutes. He'd be either shot down or forced to ditch in the ocean. Either way, dead. Just like Sandstorm 6, Jack closed his eyes, saw his wingman's F-16 tumbling out of control, smoke trailing, saw himself following the abort order because that's what good officers did. Saw the rescue choppers arriving too late, finding wreckage and regret. 34 years of that image playing on loop every time he closed his eyes. He opened them, looked at his fuel gauge. Enough to intercept. Maybe enough to help. Definitely not enough to do both and make it home clean. Prophet, what's your fuel state? Daniel's response was immediate. Maybe 8 minutes of flight time. Jack, I'm not going to make it to the coast. I'm going to have to ditch. Jack's training said to obey orders. 30 years of conditioning said to trust command. Every regulation and protocol said to RTB, file a report, let the system work. But the system had let Sandstorm 6 die. And suddenly Jack was back in that cockpit in 1991, 22 years old and terrified, listening to his wingman scream for help while headquarters ordered abort. He'd followed orders then. He'd been a good soldier. He'd done everything right. And he'd spent 3 decades wondering what if. Tower Reaper 1. I'm experiencing radio malfunction. Going off frequency for diagnostics. Sir, do not go off frequency. Sir, acknowledge. Jack switched off his transponder. What the connection went full stealth. The F-22 disappeared from Elmendorf's radar, a ghost in the night sky. He pushed the throttles forward, felt the engines respond, felt the aircraft leap toward the coordinates where a dead man was flying home. Prophet, Reaper 1 on encrypted backup frequency. I'm coming to get you. What's your position? Relief flooded Daniel's voice. 280 miles northwest of Elmendorf. Angels 28. Jack, I knew you'd come. I told them you'd come. Who's them? The Russians. Wagner Group. Private military contractors. Jack, it's complicated. I'll explain when we're safe, but right now I need you to know something. Jack's radar was painting the full tactical picture now. 6 Su-35s in pursuit, closing fast, and something else, larger, hanging back in the formation. Talk to me, Prophet. They're not trying to kill me, Daniel said. They're hurting me, leading me home, because I'm the bait. Jack's blood went cold. Explain. I'm flying a stolen Su-57 Felon, newest Russian stealth fighter. They want it back. But more than that, they want to see how we respond. They want to test our reaction time, our protocols, Jack, there's something else. What? There's a transport plane behind them. An IL-76. I've been tracking it on radar. It's full of paratroopers, Spetsnaz Special Forces. They're planning to follow me to Elmendorf, use the chaos of my arrival to insert a strike team. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Daniel wasn't a rescue operation. He was a Trojan horse. And Marcus Hayes knew it. That's why the general wanted him splashed. That's why the orders were so absolute. Better to kill one man than risk hundreds. The math was cold, logical, exactly the kind of calculation that Jack had spent 30 years learning to make. Sacrifice the few to save the many. It was doctrine. It was necessary. It was what he'd done to Sandstorm 6. Jack's hands tightened on the stick. His HUD showed Daniel's aircraft now, a single radar return against Black Ocean, running for its life. Behind him, 6 fighters closed in like sharks, and behind them, the transport, patient and predatory. He thought about Marcus Hayes in the chapel, face carved from ice, no tears for his son. Thought about the general's words. Let him go, Sullivan. Some things aren't worth saving. Thought about his own son, David, halfway around the world, trusting that his father was the kind of man who kept promises. Thought about Rebecca Hayes, waiting for a husband who would never come home. About Michael, 10 years old, asking if Jack would find his father. Thought about 34 years of nightmares and whiskey and therapy that never quite worked, all because he'd followed orders when his gut screamed to break them. The tactical display updated. Daniel's aircraft was maneuvering hard now, jinking and weaving, trying to shake missile locks. The Su-35s were closing, weapons hot. Jack's computer calculated intercept times, engagement envelopes, probability of mission success. The numbers weren't good, but numbers never told the whole story. Jack armed his weapons systems, felt the satisfying click of AEM-120 DAMRAMs coming online. 6 missiles, 6 targets. Terrible odds, but he'd faced worse. Well, he'd faced worse odds in simulators. This would be his first real air-to-air engagement since Desert Storm. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like waking up. Prophet, Reaper 1. Stay on current heading. I'm coming in from your 6 o'clock high. When I tell you to brake, you brake hard left and dive. Copy? Copy, Jack. Daniel's voice carried something new now. Not relief, not hope. Something harder. Trust. The first Su-35 got a missile lock on Daniel. Jack watched the launch sequence on his tactical display. Saw the R-77 medium-range missile streak away from the Russian fighter. 200 pounds of high explosive chasing a man who had already been dead for 4 weeks. Jack didn't hesitate. He fired. The AMRAAM dropped from his internal weapons bay, ignited, accelerated to Mach 4 in seconds. Not targeting the Russian fighter, targeting its missile. An impossible shot, trying to hit a missile with a missile, the kind of thing that worked in simulations maybe one time in 50. The 2 missiles passed each other in the darkness. Proximity fuses calculating ranges measured in microseconds. Jack's AMRAAM detonated 10 feet from the R-77. The explosion wasn't a direct hit, but it was close enough. The Russian missile tumbled, guidance destroyed, spiraled past Daniel's aircraft, and disappeared into the ocean below. And then everything changed, because firing that missile meant Jack had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He'd engaged a Russian aircraft. Not directly, not yet, but he'd interfered with their weapons. In the calculus of international conflict, that was enough. The radio erupted with the voices, Elmendorf demanding his position, Marcus Hayes screaming orders, and something new, a Russian voice, accented but clear. American aircraft, this is Kazakh flight leader. You have interfered with legal operation. Stand down immediately or we will engage. Jack switched frequencies, broadcast in the clear. Russian aircraft, this is United States Air Force. You are pursuing a stolen aircraft in international waters. The pilot is an American officer attempting to return home. Break off immediately. The response was almost conversational. American aircraft, the pilot you defend is criminal. He stole Russian property. We have right to recover. Jack checked his tactical display. The transport was still hanging back, waiting. The 6 fighters had split formation, 3 continuing pursuit of Daniel, 3 now vectoring toward Jack. He was outnumbered, outgunned, operating on fumes and bad decisions. But for the first time in 34 years, he wasn't following orders. He was doing what was right. Profit, break left and dive. Now, Daniel's aircraft snapped into a hard turn, pulling angles that should have torn a damaged airframe apart. The 3 Su-35s pursuing him overshot, had to bleed energy to reacquire. Precious seconds of confusion. Jack used them. He dove out of the high-altitude sanctuary, pushing his F-22 through the sound barrier in a screaming descent that made his instruments scream warnings. The 3 Russian fighters vectoring toward him never saw it coming. He blew past them at Mach 1.4, so fast they didn't have time to react, and positioned himself between the pursuers and Daniel. Russian flight leader, last warning. Break off or I will engage. The pause lasted 3 heartbeats. Jack could imagine the calculations happening on the other end. A lone F-22 against 6 fighters. They had numbers. But the Raptor had stealth, had sensors, had missiles that could kill from beyond visual range. And they didn't know if he was alone. For all they knew, 20 more F-22s were lurking in the darkness, invisible until they wanted to be seen. The Russian made his decision. All units, break off, return to base. 5 of the 6 fighters peeled away, afterburners igniting as they turned east toward home. But one stayed, one lone Su-35, refusing the order, continuing pursuit of Daniel. Through his canopy, Jack saw the fighter close in, saw weapons, bay doors open. He didn't hesitate. Fox 3. The second AMRAAM dropped, locked, fired. The Russian pilot saw it coming, deployed chaff and flares, broke hard right. Professional, skilled, not enough. The missile adjusted, guided by an active radar seeker that didn't care about countermeasures. It slammed into the Su-35's port engine at Mach 4, turned $30 million of aircraft into a fireball that briefly turned night into day. Jack watched for the ejection seat, saw it rocket away from the dying fighter, saw the parachute deploy. The pilot would survive, would be picked up by rescue forces, would live to fly another day. Small mercies. Elmendorf Tower was screaming now. Jack ignored it, checked his fuel. Critical. Checked Daniel's position. Barely airborne, controls failing. Prophet, you still with me? Barely. That last maneuver took everything this bird had left. I'm losing hydraulics, losing engines. I need to land now. Nearest land was Little Diomede Island, a tiny rock in the Bering Strait. American territory, barely. Population 60, mostly Alaskan natives. No runway, no emergency services, nothing but frozen ground and hope. It would have to do. Set her down on the beach, Jack said. I'll be right behind you. Daniel's aircraft descended, trailing smoke and hydraulic fluid. Jack followed, watching his friend's crippled fighter drop toward the island like a wounded bird. At 200 feet, Daniel's engines quit. The Su-57 went silent. It became a glider, 30 tons of metal and secrets with nowhere to go but down. It hit the frozen beach hard, tore off the landing gear, slid 400 meters in a shower of sparks and snow. Finally stopped, nose buried in a snowbank, but intact. Jack circled overhead, waiting for Daniel to move. Seconds crawled past, too many seconds. Then the canopy blew. Daniel climbed out, fell to the ground, got up, waved. Alive. Against every odd, every probability, every rule of survival. Alive. Jack brought his own F-22 down in a combat landing that would have gotten him grounded in peacetime. Didn't care. Popped his canopy, felt Arctic air hit his face like a fist, climbed out on legs that barely worked, crossed the distance to where Daniel stood. They looked at each other. Two pilots, two friends, separated by 4 weeks and a lifetime of trauma. "You son of a bitch," Jack said. Daniel grinned, exhausted and bleeding and alive. "I learned from the best." They embraced, brothers in everything but blood, and Jack felt something break loose in his chest. Something that had been locked tight since Desert Storm, since Sandstorm 6, since he learned that following orders and doing right were sometimes different things. He'd made his choice. Whatever came next, court-martial or commendation, he could live with it, because Daniel was alive. And this time Jack hadn't followed orders. This time, he'd followed his heart. 4 weeks earlier, the sky had been the same endless blue. Daniel Hayes pushed his F-22 Raptor through thin air at Angels 35,000 feet above the Bering Sea. Below, ice floes drifted like puzzle pieces that would never quite fit together. Beautiful and indifferent, the kind of scenery that made you forget you were flying a $70 million weapons platform in one of the most contested airspaces on Earth. His radar was clear. His fuel was good. His mission parameters were simple: fly the air defense identification zone, collect signals, intelligence on new Russian radar systems, return home in time for dinner with Rebecca and the kids. Routine, safe, a milk run. He should have known better. Prophet 1, Elmendorf Control. Be advised, we're picking up increased radio chatter in your sector. Recommend you maintain current altitude and heading. Daniel clicked his mic twice in acknowledgement. Increased chatter meant the Russians were talking to each other more than usual. Could be a training exercise. Could be a bomber patrol, testing response times. Could be nothing. The hair on the back of his neck said otherwise. He'd been flying long enough to trust his instincts, that subconscious processing of 1,000 tiny details that added up to survival. Something felt wrong about this mission. Had felt wrong since the briefing that morning when his father, General Marcus Hayes, had personally handed him the tasking order. "Your country needs you to do this, Daniel." Marcus had said it without inflection, without warmth, like he was ordering supplies, not sending his only son into disputed airspace. Daniel had wanted to push back, to question the mission profile, to ask why they were pushing so close to Russian territory for routine collection. But you didn't question a general, even when that general was your father, especially when that general was your father. So he'd saluted, accepted the mission, kissed Rebecca goodbye, told Michael and Sarah he'd see them at dinner. Now cruising through crystalline sky, he wondered if his instincts were just nerves talking. Wondered if 39 combat missions had made him paranoid. Wondered if he was turning into Jack Sullivan, seeing ghosts in every shadow. His radar warning receiver answered the question. Multiple search radars had just painted his aircraft, not the usual long-range early warning systems. These were fire control radars, the kind that guided missiles to targets. Prophet 1, Control, were showing multiple Russian fighters launching from Anadir. Repeat, scramble launch. Recommend you turn south immediately. Daniel was already banking, pulling the F-22 into a hard turn that pushed him back into his seat. His tactical display lit up like a Christmas tree. 3 contacts, Bering 090, climbing fast. Sukhoi Su-57 Felons, Russia's newest stealth fighters. The kind of aircraft that shouldn't have been deployed this far east. The kind of aircraft that cost more than most countries' entire air forces. Control, Prophet 1. I'm showing 3 Felons inbound. They're not on intercept course, they're boxing me in. Copy, Prophet 1. Maintain current heading. Do not, repeat, do not cross into Russian airspace. 4 F-15 Syas are scrambling from Eielson to assist. ETA 14 minutes. 14 minutes. Daniel checked his fuel, calculated distances, ran the numbers. The Su-57s would be on him in 3 minutes. They were faster, fresher, had the advantage of altitude and position, and they were flying a pattern he recognized, not an intercept, a corral. They were herding him east toward Russian territory. His father's voice cut through the radio frequency, sharp and cold. Prophet 1, this is Warlock Actual. Maintain position. Do not cross the border. That is a direct order. Something in Marcus's tone made Daniel's blood run cold. Not concern, Not the natural fear a father might feel for a son in danger. Just that clinical precision, that tactical calculation. Like Daniel was a chess piece, not a person. The lead Su-57 fired a burst across Daniel's nose. Tracer rounds bright against blue sky. A warning shot. The message was clear. Turn east or the next burst goes through your cockpit. Daniel had seconds to decide. Turn south, risk getting shot down in international waters. Turn east, violate Russian airspace, give Moscow exactly the propaganda victory they wanted, or do something they wouldn't expect. He pushed the throttles to military power, felt the F-22 leap forward and dove. Straight down, trading altitude for speed, pushing his aircraft into a screaming descent that made his airframe groan in protest. The Su-57S followed, professional and relentless. At 10,000 feet, Daniel pulled out of the dive, leveled off just above the wave tops, flying so low that spray from the ocean misted his canopy. Terrain masking, using the curvature of the Earth to break radar locks. An old tactic, Vietnam-era thinking. It bought him 30 seconds. Then the SAM launch warning screamed. Surface-to-air missile, S-400 system, fired from the Russian mainland. The most advanced anti-aircraft system in the world, with a range that turned the Bering Sea into a shooting gallery. Daniel pulled every evasion maneuver he knew. Chaff, flares, hard brakes that made his vision narrow to a tunnel. The first missile lost lock, detonated a mile behind him. The second adjusted, tracked him through the turns. Proximity fuse. The explosion wasn't a direct hit, but it didn't need to be. Shrapnel tore through his left engine, punched holes in his hydraulics. Warning lights turned his cockpit into a Christmas display of red and amber. Prophet 1 is hit, losing hydraulics, losing engine 2, attempting to maintain altitude. His aircraft was dying. He could feel it in the controls, that sluggish response that meant essential systems were bleeding out. The F-22 was one of the most survivable fighters ever built. Redundant systems on top of redundant systems. But even redundancy had limits. He had maybe 2 minutes of controlled flight left. Eject, Daniel. Marcus's voice again, still cold. Eject now, we'll recover you. Daniel looked at his fuel, looked at his position, looked at the Russian fighters circling like sharks, waiting for the kill. If he ejected over international waters, the Coast Guard might reach him first. Might. The Russians had boats too, had helicopters, and they were closer. If he went down, he was going into Russian hands either way. At least in the cockpit, he had options. I'm staying with the aircraft, he transmitted, attempting emergency landing on Ratmanov Island. Negative. That's Russian territory. You land there, you're a prisoner of war. Daniel almost laughed. PLBOW, like this was a real war, like there were rules that mattered anymore. His engine 2 firelight illuminated. He had less than a minute now. Sorry, Dad, he said quietly. I'm making the call. He turned east, lined up on the tiny speck of rock that was Russia's Ratmanov Island, hoped the frozen beach would be smooth enough to belly land without tearing his aircraft apart. At 200 feet, his second engine quit. The F-22 became a glider, 20 tons of composites and classified technology with nowhere to go but down. Daniel pulled the ejection handle. The canopy blew. The rocket motor under his seat fired. The world became a blur of wind and noise and sudden violent acceleration. Then the parachute deployed, jerked him hard enough to crack ribs, and suddenly everything was quiet except for the sound of wind and nylon. Below, his F-22 hit the frozen beach, cartwheeled, disintegrated into pieces that would take Russian intelligence months to fully exploit. Daniel floated down into enemy hands, watched Russian soldiers running across the ice toward his landing point, and thought about his father's voice on the radio. Clinical, tactical, cold, like he'd expected this to happen, like maybe he'd planned it. The thought was still forming when Daniel hit the ground, rolled, felt his injured ribs scream protest. He barely had time to release his parachute harness before rough hands grabbed him, slammed him face first into frozen ground. Russian voices. Commands barked in a language he'd studied but never mastered. Hands searched him, removed his survival radio, his sidearm, his knife. Zip ties bit into his wrists, tight enough to cut circulation. They hauled him to his feet, and Daniel got his first clear look at his captors. Not regular Russian military. No insignia, no unit patches. Body armor that was commercial grade, expensive. Weapons that were top of the line, maintained by people who knew their craft. Wagner Group, Russian private military contractors. Mercenaries with government backing, implausible deniability. The kind of force that didn't answer to Geneva Conventions. One of them stepped forward, older than the rest, gray hair cropped short. He wore the same unmarked fatigues but carried himself with authority that came from decades, not years. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, the man said in perfect English. Welcome to Russia. My name is Colonel Dmitry Kazakov. We have been expecting you. The words hit like a fist. Expecting him. Past tense. Not a lucky shoot down. Not an opportunistic capture. They'd known he was coming. Daniel's mind raced through implications, through possibilities. A leak in operations, a compromised communications network, bad luck and worse timing, or something much darker. He thought about his father's voice, that coldness, that lack of surprise when the Su-57s appeared, that immediate order to maintain position, to not cross the border. Like Marcus had known the trap was there, like he'd sent Daniel into it anyway. No, Daniel said aloud, rejecting the thought. No, that's impossible. Kazakov smiled, not unkindly. Come, Colonel, we have much to discuss, and you must be cold. They loaded him into a helicopter, a civilian Mi-8 with the passenger seats removed, replaced by cargo netting and tie-down points. Daniel sat on the floor, hands bound, ribs screaming with every breath, and watched Russian territory slide past below. They flew for 3 hours, deeper into Siberia, into territory so remote that rescue would be impossible, even if anyone tried. Which Daniel doubted they would. His father would write him off as KIA, killed in action, a pilot who violated orders and paid the price, a cautionary tale for the next generation. Clean, simple, tactically sound. The helicopter set down at a facility that looked like it had been abandoned since the Cold War. Concrete bunkers half buried in permafrost, rusted fences that hadn't kept anything out in decades. But appearances were deceiving. Daniel spotted modern sensors, concealed antennas, the telltale signs of active operations hidden beneath deliberate neglect. A black site, the kind of place that didn't exist on any map, didn't appear in any budget, where people could disappear and no one would ever know. They took him underground, through corridors that smelled of diesel fuel and stale air, past doors marked in Cyrillic that he couldn't read, past rooms where he heard voices, equipment, the sounds of an active intelligence operation. His cell was at the end of the longest corridor, steel door, no window, a cot bolted to the wall, a toilet, a sink, nothing else. Kazakov stood in the doorway as the guards removed Daniel's zip ties. You will not be tortured, the Russian said quietly. Physical pain is crude, ineffective. We have better methods. Then he left, and the door locked with a sound like finality. Daniel sat on the cot, felt his ribs protest, and tried to process what had happened. Shot down, captured, imprisoned in a facility that his own government would deny existed. Jack would come looking. Daniel was sure of it. Jack Sullivan didn't leave men behind, had made that promise 30 years ago and never broken it. But Jack was one man, and this was Russia. Hope was a luxury Daniel couldn't afford. He woke to the sound of the door opening. No idea how long he'd slept. Hours, maybe. Days. The cell had no windows, no clock, nothing to mark time's passage. 2 guards entered, gestured for him to stand. They led him down different corridors, through security doors that required biometric scans, into a section of the facility that felt newer, more sophisticated. They stopped at a door marked with a single Cyrillic letter. The guards opened it, pushed Daniel inside. He stepped into his own worst nightmare. The room was an exact replica of an F-22 cockpit. Every switch, every display, every detail perfect. He'd spent thousands of hours in that cockpit, knew it better than his own living room. But this one was in a Russian black site, 3,000 miles from home. Colonel Hayes, please, sit. Kazakov's voice came from speakers he couldn't see. Make yourself comfortable. After all, this is your office, yes? Daniel stood frozen, trying to process what he was seeing. A full-scale mock-up of his aircraft, accurate down to the worn spot on the throttle where his thumb always rested. We want you to fly for us, Kazakov said. Not in combat, just in simulation. We want to understand how American pilots think, how you make decisions, how you fight. Daniel found his voice. Geneva Convention says I only have to give name, rank, serial number. Geneva Convention applies to wars between nations. Kazakov sounded almost apologetic. This is not war. This is business. And you, Colonel, are an asset. I won't help you. A screen in front of the cockpit flickered to life. Daniel's breath caught. It was Rebecca, his wife, standing in their kitchen, tears streaming down her face. A uniformed officer was at the door, the kind who delivered death notifications. Rebecca's knees buckled as she processed the news, as she understood that her husband wasn't coming home. The video kept playing. Michael trying to be strong, to be the man of the house at 10 years old. Sarah crying for her daddy, not understanding why he was gone. This is what they believe, Kazakov said quietly. That you are dead, killed in action. A hero. We have not contacted them to say otherwise. Turn it off, Daniel whispered. The video continued, Rebecca's mother arriving, holding her daughter while she sobbed. The funeral preparations, the empty casket. Turn it off! The screen went black. That is future that awaits them, Kazakov said. Unless you cooperate, you help us understand F-22 tactics. You fly our simulators. You teach our pilots how you think. And in return, we let you send message to your family. Let them know you are alive. Daniel slumped into the mock-up seat, felt the familiar contours against his back. This was psychological warfare at its finest. Not pain, not threats, just the slow erosion of hope, the weight of impossible choices. What do you want to know? He asked, hating himself for the question. Everything, Kazakov replied, starting with why your father sent you into our trap. The words hit like a missile strike. Daniel's head snapped up. What? Your mission, Colonel. It was designed to fail. Surely you realize this by now. Another screen activated. This one showed classified documents, CIA letterhead, email chains that Daniel recognized. Operational planning for intelligence collection missions in the Bering Sea. We have source in your government, Kazakov said. Someone who provides information. They told us you were coming, told us your flight path, told us when to launch our fighters. You're lying. Am I? Look at the authorization signature. Daniel looked, felt the world tilt sideways. General Marcus Hayes, his father's signature. On a document labeled Operation Watchtower, a plan to deliberately expose an F-22 to Russian forces, to test their response capabilities, to gather intelligence on their newest systems. Expendable asset, the document read, Lieutenant Colonel D. Hayes. His father had sold him out, had used him as bait, had sacrificed his own son for operational intelligence. No, Daniel said, but his voice carried no conviction. No, he wouldn't. Kazakov's voice was almost gentle. Your father spent 3 years in Hanoi prisoner camp. He learned that survival requires hard choices, that sentiment is weakness, that the mission always comes first. Daniel stared at the document, at his father's signature, at the cold calculation that valued strategic advantage over his son's life. Show me more, he said quietly. Kazakov obliged. Over the next hours or days, Daniel lost track. The Russians showed him everything. CIA briefings where Marcus argued that Daniel had volunteered, knew the risks, understood the value of the intelligence they'd gain. Pentagon meetings where the operation was approved, signed off, set in motion. His father's voice on recorded calls, discussing extraction probabilities, acceptable loss ratios, political implications, never once mentioning that the expendable asset was his son. Daniel sat in the mock-up cockpit, surrounded by the familiar instruments of his trade, and felt something fundamental break inside him. Not his loyalty to country, not his oath of service, but his faith in the man who'd raised him. Marcus Hayes had taught him about duty, about sacrifice, about the hard choices that came with command. But he'd never mentioned it that sometimes your children became acceptable losses. Why are you showing me this? Daniel asked finally. What do you want? Kazakov materialized in the doorway, real now instead of just a voice. I want you to understand that you and I are not so different, Colonel. We are both tools, used by men who see us as expendable. The difference is I accept this truth. You still hope your father loves you more than he loves his mission. Daniel said nothing. What could he say? I too have son, Kazakov continued. Alexei, 24 years old. Good pilot like his father. He flew for Wagner Group in Syria, was shot down 2 years ago. The Russian's voice carried weight that hadn't been there before. Real emotion, carefully controlled. Your CIA captured him, took him to black site somewhere in Alaska. I know because I have source who told me. Same source who provides other information. Daniel processed this. A Russian mercenary with a son in American custody. A CIA source feeding intelligence both directions. A web of betrayal and compromise that made his own situation look simple. What do you want from me? He asked again. Kazakov stepped fully into the room, pulled up a chair, sat down like they were colleagues instead of captor and captive. I want to make deal. You help me find where they keep my Alexei, Help me plan rescue operation. And in return, I give you something you want. What could you possibly give me? Your father, Kazakov said simply. Evidence to destroy him. Proof of his crimes. Everything you need to make him pay for what he did to you. Daniel should have refused. Should have clung to his training, his oath, his duty. Should have told the Russian to go to hell. But he thought about Rebecca watching the death notification. About Michael trying to be strong. About Sarah crying for a father who'd been sacrificed for tactical advantage. About Marcus Hayes signing documents that condemned his own son. Tell me about this deal, Daniel said. Over the following days, or weeks, time became meaningless. Kazakov laid out the plan. Wagner Group was preparing an operation. Something big, targeting American interests in Alaska. Kazakov needed someone who knew American procedures, American responses. In exchange, he'd give Daniel the evidence, the proof of Marcus's betrayal, and more. He'd give Daniel a way home. You will escape, Kazakov said. We will make it appear real. You will steal one of our aircraft, a Su-57. You will fly toward Alaska, and we will pursue you. Your military will scramble to rescue you. In the chaos, we insert strike team. We achieve our objective. And I go home with proof that destroys my father. Exactly. What's your real objective? Daniel asked. What are you really after? Kazakov smiled. That information comes later, after you commit. Daniel should have seen the trap, should have recognized that a deal this convenient was too good to be true. Should have remembered that in this world, everyone used everyone else. But he was tired and angry and betrayed by the one person who should have protected him. So he agreed. The escape was choreographed like a dance. 2 weeks after his capture, Daniel was assigned to maintenance duty, cleaning aircraft in the Wagner Group hangar. They'd given him just enough freedom to make the opportunity feel real. He studied the Su-57 for days, memorized startup procedures by watching mechanics, reading manuals he pretended not to understand. The Russians thought Americans couldn't read Cyrillic. Daniel had taken Russian language courses at the Air Force Academy, had kept his skills current through his career. He could read every warning label, every procedure, every emergency checklist. When the moment came, it happened fast. A guard distracted by a phone call, a maintenance crew changing shifts, 30 seconds of opportunity. Daniel knocked out the guard with a fire extinguisher, took his security pass, and ran for the nearest Su-57. His hands shook as he climbed into the cockpit, as he ran through startup procedures in a foreign aircraft, as warning systems screamed in Russian. Behind him, alarms blared. Soldiers ran toward the hangar. He had maybe 90 seconds before they stopped him. The engines caught, spooled up with a sound like controlled thunder. Daniel released brakes, taxied toward the blast doors that were already beginning to close. He pushed the throttles to full military power and prayed. The Su-57 leaped forward, barely cleared the closing doors, scraped its belly on the concrete threshold. Then he was outside, still on the ground but moving fast, the runway ahead and freedom beyond. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire, 23mm shells stitching the ground beside him. Daniel pulled back on the stick, felt the fighter claw into the sky, felt enemy fire trace past his canopy. Then he heard a sound that didn't fit, an explosion behind him big enough to shake his aircraft. He glanced back, saw flames engulfing the fuel depot. Someone had set off a massive explosion right in the middle of Wagner Group's main base. A diversion, someone helping him escape. Through the chaos, he saw a figure waving from near the burning depot. Too far to identify clearly, but something about the silhouette felt familiar. Female, American flight suit. Then anti-aircraft fire forced his attention back to survival, and the figure was lost in smoke. Daniel pointed his stolen fighter toward home and pushed the throttles to maximum. Behind him, 6 Wagner Group fighters scrambled, led by Kazakov himself. The pursuit began. For 3 days, he flew across the Bering Sea, island hopping, stealing fuel from remote fishing boats, staying one step ahead of the hunters. Kazakov's voice followed him on every frequency. You fly well, Colonel Hayes. Your father would be proud. The words were poison, but Daniel couldn't deny their truth. Everything he knew about flying, about survival, about combat, Marcus Hayes had taught him. The man who'd betrayed him had also made him into exactly the pilot he needed to be to escape. The irony was almost funny. On the 4th day, fuel running critical, Daniel made contact with Elmendorf, heard his father's voice ordering him shot down, heard Jack Sullivan's voice promising to come for him anyway, and understood that some betrayals ran deeper than blood, while some bonds were stronger. He flew toward Little Diomede Island, toward Jack, toward home. Behind him, Kazakov and his fighters followed, patient and professional. And behind them, hidden in the radar clutter, a large transport aircraft shadowed the formation. The trap within the trap. Daniel had thought he understood the game, thought Kazakov wanted him to lead American forces into an ambush, thought the objective was tactical advantage. But as he approached American airspace, as his fuel gauge touched empty, as Jack Sullivan's F-22 appeared on his wing like an avenging angel, Daniel realized the truth. This wasn't about him, wasn't about intelligence or revenge, or even Kazakov's captured son. This was about starting a war, and Daniel had just brought it to Alaska's doorstep. The wind on Little Diomede Island carried the taste of salt and cordite. Jack Sullivan helped Daniel Hayes across frozen ground, one arm supporting his friend, while the other stayed close to his sidearm. Trust was good. Paranoia kept you breathing. 30 years in uniform had taught Jack that the two weren't mutually exclusive. Daniel's ribs were broken, maybe worse. Blood seeped through his Russian flight suit, dark against olive drab. He moved like a man running on fumes and willpower, which was exactly what he was. "We need to get off this island," Daniel said through gritted teeth. "They're coming." Jack scanned the sky. Clear for now, but that wouldn't last. 6 Russian fighters somewhere out there, and a transport full of troops. Not to mention whatever response Elmendorf was scrambling, assuming Marcus Hayes hadn't already ordered them to blow this entire operation to radioactive dust. The village elder, David Ishapana, emerged from the community center. 68 years old, face carved by weather and wisdom, carrying a satellite phone and a medical kit that looked older than both of them combined. "Colonel Sullivan," David said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who'd seen governments come and go while his people endured. "My people are going to the shelters. Whatever is happening, we do not want to be in the middle." "Smart," Jack said. "How long can you stay underground?" "Days, if we must," David paused. "But if Russian soldiers come to my island, how long before they find us?" The question hung in the frozen air. Little Diomede had a population of 60 Alaskan natives who'd lived on this rock for 3,000 years. Caught now in the crossfire of a conflict they didn't start and couldn't escape. "We won't let it come to that," Jack said. Daniel made a sound that might have been a laugh. "How exactly are we going to stop them? We've got 2 F-22s with maybe 20 minutes of fuel each, no backup, and half the Russian Air Force incoming." Jack helped his friends sit on the frozen steps of the community center. "One problem at a time. First, we figure out what they're really after." "I told you, they want to use me as bait to insert a strike team during the chaos." "That's the cover story," Jack said. "But Kazakov doesn't strike me as the kind of operator who risks this much for a simple infiltration. There's something bigger happening." Before Daniel could answer, the sound of jet engines cut through the Arctic silence. Jack's head snapped up. Wrong sound profile for F-22s. Different acoustic signature. He knew that sound, had trained against it in simulators. F-16 Fighting Falcon, American. But that didn't make it friendly. The aircraft appeared low over the water, afterburner blazing, close enough that Jack could see the weapons loadout. Air-to-ground ordnance, precision-guided munitions, the kind you used when you wanted to erase a target from existence. The radio in Jack's survival vest crackled to life. "Reaper 1, this is Warlock Actual. Clear the target area immediately. I have authorization to sanitize the location. You have 5 minutes to evacuate." Marcus Hayes, still cold, still clinical, still willing to kill his own son to bury the evidence. Jack keyed his mic. "General, there are American civilians on this island. They will be evacuated. You and any hostile forces will not be." Daniel struggled to his feet, pain etched across his face. "He's really going to do it. He's going to bomb us." Jack's mind raced through options. They could run, but there was nowhere to go. Could hide, but thermal imaging would find them in minutes. Could surrender, but to whom? The sound of rotors provided an answer he didn't want. 4 helicopters appeared from the north. Mi-8 Hips, Russian transport birds. Not sleek, not fast, but rugged and reliable. The kind that had been hauling troops into bad situations since before Jack was born. They set down 200 meters away, rotor wash kicking up snow and ice. Doors slid open. Soldiers deployed with professional efficiency. 16 men, maybe more. Body armor, modern weapons. Moving with the coordination of a unit that trained together, fought together. Wagner Group. Jack drew his M9 pistol. 17 rounds, 16 soldiers. Math that didn't work in his favor, even if he was a perfect shot, which he wasn't. Daniel pulled his own sidearm despite his injuries. Guess we go down fighting. Wait, Jack said, because something wasn't adding up. The soldiers had deployed defensively, not aggressively, taking cover, establishing a perimeter, pointing weapons outward not at the two American pilots standing in the open. And walking toward them, unarmed, hands raised, was Colonel Dmitry Kazakov. The Russian looked like he'd been flying for days, gray stubble on his jaw, eyes red-rimmed with fatigue, but his bearing was still military straight, still carried that confidence that came from surviving things that killed lesser men. He stopped 10 meters away, close enough to talk, far enough to avoid immediate threat. "Colonel Sullivan," he called out, "we need to speak." Jack kept his pistol raised. "I'm listening. Your general is going to bomb this island in 4 minutes. Maybe less. He wants to kill everyone here. You, me, his own son, all evidence destroyed. Tell me something I don't know." Kazakov pulled something from his pocket, slowly, carefully. A USB drive. "On this drive is proof. Proof that General Hayes sold his son. Proof that he has been selling American secrets to my employers for 18 months. Proof that he is traitor." Daniel's voice was raw. "Why would you give us that?" "Because," Kazakov said, "I am not your enemy, Lieutenant Colonel. Your father is." Jack's finger stayed on the trigger. "You tried to kill us. I tried to capture you. There is difference." Kazakov glanced at the sky where the F-16 was circling. "We do not have time for this. I propose temporary alliance. We escape this island together. We expose Hayes together, and then we go our separate ways. What do you get out of it?" "Information." Kazakov's eyes were hard. "Your CIA has my son. He has been held in black site in Alaska for 2 years. I want to know where. I want to get him back." Jack processed this. A Russian mercenary offering alliance against an American general. Enemy of my enemy logic. The kind of deal that made sense only when the world had gone completely sideways, which apparently it had. "How do I know this isn't another trap?" "You do not." Kazakov shrugged. "But in 90 seconds, that F-16 releases weapons, and we all die. So you must choose quickly. Die with honor, refusing to trust Russian, or live with shame, accepting help from enemy." Jack looked at Daniel. His friend's face was pale, blood loss and shock taking their toll. Looked at David Ayapana, watching from the community center doorway, his people's lives hanging in the balance. Looked at the F-16 beginning its attack run. Made his choice. "Your men form a perimeter. We evacuate the civilians to your helicopters. You give us that drive and all the evidence on it. And if you're lying, if this is a trap, I will personally put a bullet in your head." Kazakov smiled grimly. "Fair terms, Colonel. I accept." The next 2 minutes were controlled chaos. Wagner soldiers helped evacuate the village, carrying elders and children to the waiting helicopters. David Iapana organized his people with the efficiency of a man who'd survived worse than this. Everyone moving fast, but not panicking. Good discipline. Jack approved. The F-16 was 30 seconds from weapon release when the last civilian boarded. Jack and Daniel climbed into the lead helicopter with Kazakov. The Russian shouted commands in his native language. The Mi-8s lifted off, rotors screaming, just as the Fighting Falcons bomb bay opened. GBU-38, Joint Direct Attack, munitions fell like judgment, precision-guided, unstoppable. 2,000 pounds of high explosive designed to turn hardened bunkers into smoking craters. The first bomb hit the beach where Daniel's Su-57 had crashed. The explosion was white-hot fury, a miniature sun blooming against frozen ground. The shockwave hit the helicopter, tossed it sideways. Jack grabbed a handhold, felt his stomach lurch. The second bomb hit the village center. David Iapana's home of 60 years. The community building where generations had been born and married and mourned. 3,000 years of human presence erased in a microsecond of American military precision. Jack watched his home disappear, David said quietly beside him. The elder's face was carved stone, but his eyes held something ancient and terrible. "My grandfather's grave, my wife's memorial, all gone." "I'm sorry," Jack said, and meant it. David looked at him. "You saved my people, Colonel. Buildings can be rebuilt, stories can be retold, but people, once gone, stay gone." The helicopter banked hard, diving for the deck, flying nap of the earth to avoid radar. Behind them, Little Diomede Island burned, black smoke rising into clean Arctic sky. "Your father did this," Kazakov said to Daniel. "He is willing to destroy anything to protect his secrets." Daniel said nothing, just stared at the destruction, face unreadable. Jack pulled out his own radio, switched to encrypted frequency. Elmendorf Control, this is Reaper 1. Be advised, Little Diomede has been destroyed. All civilians evacuated. We are inbound to mainland Alaska. The response was immediate and hostile. Reaper 1, you are ordered to land immediately. Armed forces are authorized to use lethal force if you fail to comply. Jack killed the radio, looked at Kazakov. Where are we going? Kazakov pulled out a tablet, showed Jack a map. Here, abandoned Cold War installation 60 miles north of Fairbanks. Your CIA converted it to black site 3 years ago. Very secret, very illegal. How do you know about it? Because I have source inside CIA. Same source who told me about your son's mission. Same source who has been feeding information both ways. Jack's blood went cold. A mole. Inside American intelligence. High enough to access operational planning. Deep enough to know about black sites that didn't officially exist. Who? Kazakov smiled. That information I save. For now, you must trust me. I don't trust you. Then you are a smart man, Colonel. But you need me, and I need you. So we work together until we do not. The helicopters hugged the coastline, staying low enough that waves seemed close enough to touch. Jack's tactical mind was already running scenarios. A black site assault against CIA contractors, with Russian mercenaries as allies. Court-martial offenses piling up like cordwood, assuming he lived long enough to face trial. His radio crackled again. Different frequency, different voice. Reaper 1, this is Reaper 2, do you copy? Jack's heart sank, he knew that voice. Captain Ben Cooper, 29 years old, MIT graduate, good pilot, good kid, following orders because that's what good officers did. Reaper 2, this is Reaper 1, I copy. Sir, I have orders to intercept and destroy your aircraft. Ben's voice carried something that sounded like regret. General Hayes has designated you a rogue element. I'm weapons hot and I have authorization to fire. Jack closed his eyes, thought about another young pilot, 34 years ago, Sandstorm 6, Robert Cooper, Ben's father. The wingman Jack had failed to save because he'd followed orders. Now history was repeating itself, with the son pointing missiles at the man who'd let his father die. Cooper, listen to me. General Hayes is compromised. He's working with Russian intelligence. I have proof. Sir, Ben hesitated. Sir, I can't just ignore orders. Your father couldn't either. And I followed those orders, and he died. Jack's voice was raw. I've spent 34 years living with that choice. Don't make me live with yours too. Silence on the radio. Jack counted heartbeats. 10, 20, 30. Then Ben spoke again, quieter. My father talked about you. Before he died, I mean. I was 5 years old. I barely remember him. But I remember he said you were a good man, that you always tried to do the right thing. I failed him, son. I won't fail you. More silence. Jack could imagine the conflict tearing through Ben's mind. Orders versus conscience. Duty versus morality. The same choice Jack had made an hour ago. The choice that defined you. Sir, Ben said finally, my radar just malfunctioned. I'm returning to base for diagnostics. Jack felt something unlock in his chest. Thank you, Captain. Don't thank me yet. When they figure out I let you go, I'm done. Career over. Maybe prison. Then you better make sure we succeed. Because if we don't, we're all done. What do you need me to do? Fly to these coordinates. Jack read off the location of the black site. We're going to need backup. Sir, Ben's voice held disbelief. That's a CIA facility. We can't just assault it. Watch us. Reaper 1 out. Jack killed the radio, looked at Kazakov. We have one more pilot, young and experienced, but he'll fly. Good, Kazakov said. We will need all help we can get. The helicopter set down in a clearing 20 miles from the black site. Trees provided cover, snow-muffled sound. Jack climbed out, felt Arctic cold slap him awake. Daniel staggered from the aircraft, nearly collapsed. One of Kazakov's men caught him, helped him to a fallen log. A medic appeared, started treating the broken ribs with professional efficiency. Jack stood with Kazakov, looking at the tablet showing the black site layout. Blueprints from 1962, the Russian said, when this was NORAD bunker, designed to survive nuclear strike. Very strong, very well defended. How many guards? 24. CIA contractors. Former special operations. Well-trained, well-equipped. Jack did the math. 24 professionals against 16 Wagner soldiers, 1 injured pilot, 1 52-year-old colonel, and 1 kid fresh out of flight school. We're going to die, Jack said. Probably, Kazakov agreed, but we die trying to do right thing. Better than dying for lie. Before Jack could respond, the sound of jet engines announced Ben Cooper's arrival. The young captain brought his F-22 in low, landed on a frozen lake a quarter-mile away, walked through snow to where they'd gathered, still in flight suit, helmet tucked under one arm. He looked at the Wagner soldiers, at Kazakov, at the entire impossible situation. "So this is what treason looks like," Ben said. "This is what the right thing looks like," Jack replied. "Sometimes they're the same." Ben nodded slowly. "Then let's do it." They planned the assault like professionals because that's what they were, nationality and allegiance aside. Kazakov's Wagner soldiers knew their business. They'd assaulted hardened positions in Syria, Ukraine, Libya. This was just another target. The black site was built into a hillside, bunker entrance concealed by rusted doors that looked abandoned. But thermal imaging showed heat signatures, power generation, active ventilation. The facility was very much operational. Kazakov's plan was simple: breach the main entrance with thermite charges. Wagner soldiers provide suppressive fire. American pilots secure the server room and locate the prisoners. Extraction via helicopter once objectives achieved. Time to assault, estimated 20 minutes. Casualties, estimated 30%. Chance of success, 50-50 at best. Jack checked his weapons. M9 pistol, 12 rounds, not enough. One of Kazakov's soldiers handed him an M4 carbine, 6 magazines. American weapon in Russian hands. The irony wasn't lost on him. Daniel couldn't fight, not with his injuries. He'd stay with the helicopters, monitor radio traffic, provide early warning if reinforcements came. Before they moved out, he grabbed Jack's arm. "If this goes wrong, if I don't make it," Daniel said, "tell Rebecca I love her. Tell the kids their father tried to do the right thing at the end. You'll tell them yourself." Daniel's grip tightened. "And Jack, about my father. Make sure he pays. Make sure everyone knows what he did." "I will," Jack promised. They moved through snow in tactical formation. No talking, hand signals only. Professional soldiers doing professional work. Allegiances temporarily forgotten in service of a mission that mattered. The thermite charges went on the bunker door. Wagner demo expert worked with calm precision, setting fuses, running dead cord. 30 seconds to breach. Jack positioned himself with Ben and 4 Wagner soldiers. Kazakov led the main assault element. One of the Russians' men was a comm specialist who'd tap into the facility's network once inside. Everything depended on speed. Get in fast, hit hard, secure objectives before defenders could organize. The thermite ignited with white-hot fury, melting through steel like butter. The bunker door glowed, sagged, collapsed inward. Smoke and chemical stench poured out. Wagner soldiers went through first. Night vision active, weapons up. Jack and Ben followed, entering a world of concrete corridors and artificial light. Gunfire erupted immediately. CIA contractors responded faster than expected. Flashbangs detonated in the confined space, disorienting everyone. Jack fired controlled bursts, saw targets fall, didn't let himself think about the fact that he was shooting Americans. They were defending an illegal facility, housing prisoners without trial, serving a corrupt general who'd sacrificed his own son. Lines got blurry in situations like this. The assault team split up. Kazakov's element pushed toward the cell block. Jack's team headed for the server room. Ben moved like he'd trained for this, which he had, just never imagined doing it for real against his own countrymen. They cleared corridors room by room, killed lights where they found them, used night vision advantage. Professional urban combat, the kind Jack hadn't done since Iraq. His body remembered even if his mind had tried to forget. The server room door was reinforced steel, magnetic lock, biometric scanner. Wagner comm specialist pulled out a tablet, started hacking. Behind them, gunfire echoed through corridors. Screams, explosions. The sounds of men killing each other for causes they might not even fully understand. The lock clicked open. Jack pushed through, Ben covering, found himself in a room full of computer equipment. Servers humming, hard drives spinning. Information, intelligence, secrets. Everything they needed to destroy Marcus Hayes. The specialist went to work, fingers flying over keyboards. Jack and Ben held the door, waiting for inevitable counterattack. It came with brutal efficiency. 6 contractors, coordinated assault, flash grenades, and suppressive fire. Jack and Ben returned fire, forced them back, but barely. These weren't weekend warriors, these were professionals. The firefight was short and brutal. Jack took a round through his left shoulder, felt it punch through muscle, exit clean. Pain came after, white-hot and insistent. He kept firing. Ben went down, hit in the leg, kept shooting from the floor. The Wagner specialist kept typing, downloading, not looking up even as bullets snapped past his head. Then Kazakov was there. Wagner soldiers pouring into the server room, turning the tide. The contractors fell back, retreated deeper into the facility. "How long?" Jack shouted over the gunfire. 2 minutes, the specialist replied. In combat, 2 minutes was an eternity. They held, burned through ammunition, watched the progress bar crawl across the screen. 90%, 95, 100. The specialist pulled the drive, held it up like a trophy. "We have everything." "Then move," Kazakov ordered. They fought their way back through corridors now slick with blood and spent brass. Jack's shoulders screamed with every movement. Ben limped, supported by a Wagner soldier. 2 Russians were dead, 3 more wounded. Acceptable losses in the calculus of military operations. Jack hated that he still thought that way. They reached the cell block, found Kazakov standing in front of an open cell, staring at a young man who looked like a younger version of himself. Alexei Kazakov, 24 years old, emaciated, bruised, but alive. "Papa," the young man said in Russian. Kazakov embraced his son, and for just a moment, the hardened mercenary commander was just a father who'd found what he'd lost. Jack understood that feeling. Thought about David, his Marine son, halfway around the world. Wondered if he'd ever see him again. "We found others," one of Wagner's soldiers reported. 11 more prisoners. Russians, all military, all supposedly dead. "Get them out," Jack ordered. All of them. They evacuated the cell block. 12 emaciated men who'd been erased from existence, held in a facility that didn't officially exist, by an agency that denied everything. The helicopter extraction was chaos. Wounded soldiers, rescued prisoners, CIA contractors regrouping for counterattack. Jack coordinated the evacuation while Kazakov's men provided covering fire. Ben Cooper flew close air support in his F-22, strafing the facility entrance to keep defenders pinned. The young captain had crossed his Rubicon, burned his bridges, no going back now. The last helicopter lifted off just as CIA reinforcements arrived. Black SUVs, more contractors, heavy weapons. Too late to stop the assault, just in time to watch it succeed. Jack sat in the vibrating helicopter, shoulder bandaged by the same Wagner medic who'd treated Daniel. Looked at Kazakov across the cabin. The Russian held his son close, both of them crying without shame. Next to them, the data specialist clutched the drive containing enough evidence to destroy a general and expose an intelligence network that had operated in shadow for years. "So what now?" Ben shouted over the rotor noise. "Now," Jack said, "we make sure everyone knows the truth." His radio crackled. "Emergency frequency, Elmendorf Tower. All aircraft, this is Warlock Actual. I am declaring a no-fly zone over Alaska. Any aircraft not immediately landing will be engaged and destroyed. This includes all military and civilian assets. This is not a drill." Jack felt ice settle in his stomach. Marcus Hayes was going scorched earth, willing to shoot down anyone, anything, to prevent the evidence from going public. The helicopters were slow, vulnerable, easy targets for the F-16CS that would be scrambling right now. They needed to get the evidence to safety, needed to broadcast it before Marcus could silence them. Needed a miracle. Jack looked at Ben Cooper, at the young pilot who'd sacrificed everything to do the right thing. "Captain, how do you feel about being famous?" "Sir," Jack held up the data drive. "This needs to go public. Live stream, social media, every news outlet in the world. And it needs to happen in the next 10 minutes, before your former commander shoots us out of the sky." Ben's eyes widened. "You want me to broadcast classified intelligence?" "I want you to broadcast the truth." Jack's voice was steel. These men held prisoner. Marcus Hayes' treason. All of it. Let the world decide what's classified and what's criminal. Ben took the drive, pulled out his phone, looked at the data. His face went pale as he read through files, saw the scope of the betrayal. "This will destroy him," Ben said quietly. "Good. It'll also destroy parts of the intelligence apparatus, compromise operations, maybe get people killed." Jack met his eyes. Some systems need to be destroyed. Some secrets need to be told, even when the cost is high. Ben nodded slowly. "Then let's burn it all down." The young captain started uploading. To Twitter, to YouTube, to WikiLeaks and Reddit and every platform that would take it. The helicopter's satellite link was slow, but it worked. Within 3 minutes, the first post went live. Within 5, they were trending. Within 7, news helicopters were scrambling. Within 10, the world knew that General Marcus Hayes had sacrificed his son, sold American secrets, and run an illegal black site that violated every treaty the country had signed. The radio exploded with traffic, orders, counter-orders, confusion. The clean military hierarchy collapsing into chaos as evidence spread too fast to contain. And through it all, Marcus Hayes's voice, no longer cold and clinical, furious, desperate. Sullivan, you've destroyed everything. Decades of operations compromised. Sources exposed. You've killed this country's ability to gather intelligence. Jack keyed his mic one last time. No, Marcus. I've killed your ability to betray it. There's a difference. He turned off the radio, watched the sun rise over Alaska, and wondered if doing the right thing was supposed to feel this much like falling. The world learned the truth at 37,000 feet. Jack Sullivan watched his phone screen as the evidence spread across social media like wildfire through dry timber. Video clips, classified documents, audio recordings of General Marcus Hayes authorizing his son's sacrifice. Within minutes, major news networks picked it up. Within an hour, the hashtag General Hayes traitor was trending worldwide. But trends didn't stop missiles. The helicopter shuddered as Ben Cooper's voice crackled over the radio, young and urgent. Reaper 1, I'm painting 40-plus contacts launching from Eelson. F-16 Fighting Falcons, full weapons load. ETA to your position, 12 minutes. Jack looked at Kazakov across the vibrating cabin. The Russian colonel held his son Alexei close, both of them exhausted, both finally together. Around them, 11 other rescued prisoners sat in varying states of shock and relief. 2 Wagner soldiers were dead, wrapped in thermal blankets. 5 more were wounded, including the specialist who'd extracted the data. They were in no condition to fight. Can we outrun them? Jack asked. Kazakov shook his head. Helicopters cruise at 120 knots. F-16s fly at 600. We have maybe 10 minutes before they are in missile range. Daniel Hayes, sitting near the door despite his injuries, spoke up. My father won't fire on us while we have Russian nationals aboard. It would be an act of war. Your father just bombed American territory. Ben's voice cut in. I don't think he's worried about starting wars anymore. Jack's tactical mind processed options. All bad. The helicopters were slow, vulnerable, flying low over the Bering Sea toward the Alaskan coast. 4 Mi-8s packed with wounded soldiers and rescued prisoners. No weapons capable of engaging fighters. No stealth. No chance. They needed a miracle or a sacrifice. Jack had spent 34 years avoiding sacrifices. Time to stop avoiding. He keyed his radio. Ben, where's the nearest runway? Gamble Airport on St. Lawrence Island. Single strip, 2,500 feet. Might handle the helicopters. Get these birds on the ground there. Offload everyone except essential crew. Then get them to Anchorage on a civilian ferry. And you, sir? Jack looked at the stolen Su-57 Felon secured to the deck of one helicopter. Damaged but potentially flyable. Daniel had somehow kept it together during 3 days of running from Russian fighters. If it could fly then, maybe it could fly now. I'm going to buy you time. Understanding dawned in Ben's voice. Sir, that's suicide. You're talking about flying a damaged enemy aircraft against 40 American fighters. 38, Jack corrected. You and I make 40. I'll take the Su-57. You stay with your F-22. Between us, we might convince them to negotiate. There's no negotiation, sir. General Hayes wants us dead. Then he'll have to kill me personally. Jack turned to Kazakov. I need your best mechanic. And I need 20 minutes. The Russian's eyes narrowed. You plan to sacrifice yourself. I plan to do what I should have done 34 years ago. Save my wingman, even if it costs everything. Kazakov studied him for a long moment, then nodded. You are either very brave man or very stupid man. I've had 34 years to figure out which, still not sure. They set down on Gamble Island's tiny airstrip. The village was even smaller than Little Diomede, maybe 600 people, mostly Yupik natives who'd fished these waters since before history kept records. The locals came out to stare at Russian helicopters landing on American soil, at wounded soldiers and rescued prisoners, and 2 American pilots preparing to fight their own air force. One elder approached Jack as Wagner mechanics swarmed over the Su-57, assessing damage, jury-rigging repairs. What happens here today? The old man asked. Honestly, Jack said, I don't know, but I'm trying to make sure you don't end up like Little Diomede. The elder nodded slowly. We heard what happened. David Iapana's home, destroyed. 3,000 years, gone. I'm sorry. Words don't rebuild what bombs destroy, Colonel, but actions might prevent the next bombing. The elder gripped Jack's shoulder. My grandson serves in the Air Force, F-15 pilot, stationed at Yeltsin. He may be in one of those fighters coming to kill you. Jack felt the weight of that statement. Fighting his own people was abstract until you thought about some kid, somebody's grandson, just following orders like Jack had done for 30 years. I'll do my best not to kill anyone. The elder smiled sadly. That is all any warrior can promise. Good luck, Colonel. Daniel found Jack near the Su-57, watching Wagner mechanics work with professional efficiency. The Russian fighter was a marvel of engineering, even damaged. Stealth design, thrust vectoring, systems integration that rivaled the F-22. In another life, Jack would have been fascinated. You're really doing this, Daniel said. It wasn't a question. Don't see another option. There's always another option. Daniel's voice was rough. You could surrender, face court-martial, tell your story in a military tribunal. Your father would bury that story so deep it would never see daylight. Jack checked his shoulder wound. The Wagner medic had done good work, but it still screamed with every movement. This way, it's public, it's live. Every news helicopter with a camera will be watching. Marcus can't hide what happens next. He can kill you, probably will. Jack pulled on the Russian flight suit that Kazakov's men had provided, felt the unfamiliar weight of foreign equipment. But he'll have to do it in front of the whole world. And even if I don't make it, the truth is already out there. You're already safe. Daniel was quiet for a moment, then pulled something from his pocket. His wedding ring. Battered gold band that had survived capture, torture, escape. Give this to Rebecca, Daniel said. Tell her I wore it every day. Tell her I never stopped fighting to get back to her. You'll give it to her yourself. Jack, I'm not stupid. I've lost too much blood. These ribs are probably puncturing things that shouldn't be punctured. I've got maybe a day before infection or internal bleeding or shock catches up with me. Daniel pressed the ring into Jack's hand. Make sure my kids know I tried to do the right thing. That matters more than whether I lived or died. Jack closed his fingers around the ring, felt the weight of promises he might not be able to keep. I'll tell him, he said. Ben Cooper approached, flight suit still on, helmet under his arm. The young captain looked like he'd aged a decade in the past few hours. Sir, I'm going up with you. Negative, Captain. You stay here. Coordinate the civilian evacuation. Make sure everyone gets to safety. With respect, sir, you trained me to never leave a wingman. Ben's jaw was set. My father died because his wingman followed orders instead of conscience. I'm not making that mistake. Jack wanted to argue, but he saw himself in Ben's eyes. The same stubborn determination. The same refusal to live with regrets. Okay, Captain, but you follow my lead. If I tell you to break off, you break off. Understood? Understood, sir. They wouldn't follow that order. Both knew it. But the ritual of command mattered, even when everyone knew it was theater. Kazakov walked over, his son Alexei beside him. The younger Kazakov looked better after food and water, but his eyes still held the haunted look of a man who'd spent 2 years in a hole. The Su-57 is ready, Kazakov said. My mechanics have done what they can. It will fly, but not well. Hydraulics are compromised. One engine is running at 70%. Weapon systems are offline. So I'm flying an unarmed, crippled fighter against 40 fully armed F-16. So, Kazakov smiled grimly. Yes, is very Russian way to fight. I need one more thing, Jack said. Can your comms specialist patch me into American military frequencies? All of them. And can he set up a live stream? Live stream? To every social media platform. Every news network. I want the whole world watching what happens next. Understanding dawned in Kazakov's eyes. You are going to force General Hayes to kill you in public view. It's the only way to make sure he can't bury this. Jack looked at the Su-57, at the red star on its tail that marked it as enemy equipment. If I die in a Russian fighter, Marcus can spin it as a defection. But if I'm broadcasting the truth as it happens, if people can hear me talking, hear Marcus giving orders, then the narrative is mine, not his. Is clever, Kazakov admitted. Also insane, but clever. The comm specialist, a young Russian who introduced himself only as Pavel, set up the equipment. Laptop, satellite uplink, cameras mounted in the Su-57's cockpit. Within 20 minutes, they had a live feed broadcasting to YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, every platform that would take it. The view counter started climbing immediately. 1,000, 5,000, 10,000. People around the world tuning in to watch an American colonel prepare to fight his own Air Force in a stolen Russian fighter. Jack climbed into the cockpit, felt the unfamiliar controls under his hands. Everything was in Cyrillic, warning labels he couldn't read, switches he had to identify by position and function. It was like flying blind, trusting muscle memory and instinct. The way he'd been living for 34 years. Pavel's voice came through the helmet radio. "You are live, Colonel. 50,000 viewers and climbing. Say something." Jack keyed the microphone, looked directly at the camera. "My name is Colonel Jack Sullivan, United States Air Force. Serial number classified for operational security. For 28 years, I've served my country with honor. Today, I'm about to fight against it, and I want you to understand why." He took a breath, felt the weight of the moment. 4 weeks ago, General Marcus Hayes sent his son, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Hayes, into a trap. A mission designed to fail. Daniel was shot down, captured, held prisoner by Russian mercenaries. His father declared him dead without attempting rescue, without even trying. The view counter hit 100,000. Today, Daniel escaped, flew home in a stolen enemy aircraft. And instead of welcoming him back, instead of celebrating his survival, General Hayes tried to kill him. Bombed an island full of American civilians to silence the truth. Ordered my execution to prevent evidence of his crimes from going public. Jack fired up the Su-57's engines. They caught with a roar that shook the airframe. That evidence is now public. Everyone can see what he's done. But right now, 40 American fighters are inbound to kill me and everyone associated with this operation. So I'm going to do something that 34 years ago I was too afraid to do. He advanced the throttles, felt the fighter start to move. I'm going to disobey orders. I'm going to fight for what's right instead of what's authorized. And I'm going to make sure that if I die today, the whole world knows why. 200,000 viewers. My name is Jack Sullivan, and I am flying toward a battle I cannot win, to buy time for people I've sworn to protect. If you're watching this, if you know someone in the military, tell them what's happening here. Tell them that orders aren't always right, that conscience matters more than command. He rolled onto the runway. Ben's F-22 was already airborne, circling overhead. And if I don't make it home, tell my son David that his father finally learned what his wingman tried to teach him 3 decades ago. Some things are worth dying for. Jack pushed the throttles to military power. The Su-57 leaped forward, damaged but defiant. At rotation speed, he pulled back, felt the fighter claw into Arctic sky. 500,000 viewers. Below, Gamble Island fell away. Ahead, somewhere in the crystalline blue, 40 American fighters were inbound. Behind him, the sun climbed over the horizon, painting contrails gold. It was a beautiful day to make peace with 34 years of ghosts. The radar contact appeared at 70 miles. Jack's RWR, radar warning receiver, started chirping. Multiple search radars painting his aircraft. Fire control systems locking on. The F-16S had found him. Ben's voice came over the radio, steady despite the situation. "Reaper 1, I'm showing 38 F-16s in combat spread. They're not in attack formation yet. Looks like they're waiting for orders." "Copy, Reaper 2. Jack checked his fuel, enough for maybe 40 minutes of combat maneuvering, if he could even call it combat when his weapons were offline. Broadcast the following on all frequencies. Tell them we want to negotiate. Sir, they won't negotiate. General Hayes wants us dead. Then let's make him say it out loud, in front of 1 million witnesses. The view counter had hit 700,000. Jack could imagine newsrooms around the world cutting to the live feed, politicians watching, military brass trying to figure out how to spin this. Too late for spinning. The truth was in free fall and picking up speed. Jack broadcast on emergency frequency. "American fighters, this is Colonel Jack Sullivan, service number classified. I am requesting parley under rules of engagement. I am unarmed and willing to negotiate peaceful resolution." The response came from a voice he didn't recognize. Cold, professional, following orders. "Unidentified aircraft, you are flying a hostile fighter in restricted airspace. You have 30 seconds to turn back or you will be engaged. I am an American officer attempting to prevent an illegal execution ordered by a compromised general. I have evidence of treason at the highest levels. I am asking for the opportunity to present this evidence to proper authorities. You have 20 seconds. Jack felt ice in his veins. They weren't even pretending to listen. Marcus had given them orders, and good soldiers followed orders. The way Jack had followed orders when Sandstorm 6 was dying, he tried again. "To the pilots out there, I know you're just doing your jobs. I know you've been told I'm a traitor. But I'm asking you to watch the live stream that's broadcasting right now. Look at the evidence. Then decide if following these orders makes you a good soldier or just another tool of corruption. 10 seconds. The view counter hit 1 million. Jack's hands tightened on the stick. Next to him, Ben's F-22 flew formation, the young captain refusing to abandon his wingman. Time's up, the voice said. 4 F-16 broke formation, accelerated toward Jack's position. Weapons hot, missiles armed. Jack broke right, pushed the damaged Su-57 into a turn that made the airframe groan. The Russian fighter had incredible maneuverability when healthy. Wounded, it was like wrestling a truck with a broken axle. Missile launch warning screamed. 4 AIM-120, AMRAAM streaked toward him, radar-guided death traveling at Mach 4. Jack deployed chaff, dove for the deck, pulled maneuvers that sent pain shooting through his wounded shoulder. 3 missiles lost lock, detonated safely away. The 4th adjusted, tracked him through the evasion. Ben's voice, urgent. Reaper 1, break left! The young captain's F-22 dove between Jack and the missile, flares and chaff blooming like fireworks. The AMRAAM seeker head confused, locked onto the false targets, exploded harmlessly. Thanks, Reaper 2. Don't mention it, sir, but I'm Winchester now. That was my last countermeasure. Copy. 4 more F-16 pressed the attack, then 8. Then all 38 coordinated assault, textbook tactics. They weren't trying to capture, weren't trying to disable, just kill. Marcus Hayes had given the order to execute. Jack flew like he hadn't flown in 30 years, pulling angles, using terrain, exploiting every weakness in the F-16's combat envelope. The Su-57 might have been damaged, but it was still a 5th-generation fighter, and Jack Sullivan might have been old, but he'd been flying fighters since before most of these pilots were born. But numbers mattered, experience mattered, and eventually luck ran out. Ben took a hit. Missile proximity fused, shrapnel tore through his F-22's tail. The young captain fought for control, lost it, made the call. Reaper 1, I'm ejecting. Jack watched his wingman's canopy blow, saw the ejection seat rocket away from the dying fighter, saw the parachute deploy, saw Ben floating down toward the Bering Sea, where hypothermia would kill him in 10 minutes. Jack made his choice. Again, the same choice he'd been making since this started. All aircraft, this is Sullivan. I'm breaking off. One of your shots just sent an American pilot into the ocean. If you want to kill me, fine. But that kid freezes to death in 10 minutes. Someone needs to rescue him. The tactical channel erupted with chatter. Jack caught fragments. Pilot down, search and rescue, Coast Guard, and underneath it all, confusion. Because nobody wanted to be the pilot who let a fellow American die. Then Marcus Hayes' voice cut through everything. Cold, final. Negative. All aircraft maintain pursuit of hostile targets. SAR will be dispatched when tactical situation permits. When tactical situation permits. Meaning after Jack was dead. Meaning Ben Cooper would freeze while fighters circled overhead. Following orders. Just like Sandstorm 6 had died while Jack followed orders. No, Jack said aloud, not again. He turned his crippled Su-57 toward Ben's parachute. Opened a channel directly to the F-16 pilots. Listen to me, all of you. I know you've been told I'm a traitor. I know you think you're defending your country. But right now, there's an American pilot in the water. Your brother in arms, and your commanding officer just ordered you to let him die. Silence on the radio. I'm flying to his position. I'm going to mark it with a smoke flare, and then I'm going to keep flying, draw you away from him. And I'm begging you, one of you break off, save that kid, then come back and kill me if you have to. More silence. Jack could imagine the conflict in those cockpits. Orders versus conscience, duty versus humanity. The view counter hit 2 million. Then a new voice, young, southern accent, uncertain. Rattlesnake 4 breaking formation. I'm going after the downed pilot. Rattlesnake 4. Return to formation. Marcus's voice no longer cold, furious. That is a direct order. Sir, with all due respect, I didn't join the Air Force to watch Americans die. Rattlesnake 4, RT for SAR mission. The F-16 peeled away, dove toward Ben's position. A second fighter followed, then a third. Jack felt something break loose in his chest. Hope, maybe, or vindication. The rest of the formation hesitated. Some turned back toward Eelson. Others stayed on station, but weapons still safe, not firing. And one F-16 accelerated, afterburner blazing, heading straight for Jack. The lead aircraft, the one that had been giving orders. Jack's threat receiver screamed as the fighter achieved missile lock. "Sullivan, this is Colonel Maxwell, CAG of the 354th Fighter Wing. I have been authorized to terminate you with extreme prejudice. You have 10 seconds to surrender." Jack checked his fuel, nearly empty, checked his systems, failing across the board, checked his six. One very angry F-16 pilot with authorization to kill. He thought about his son David, about Daniel's wedding ring in his pocket, about 34 years of following orders and wondering what if. "Colonel Maxwell," Jack said calmly, "you should know that this conversation is being broadcast to 2.3 million people. Whatever you do next, they're all watching. I don't care who's watching. You're a traitor flying an enemy aircraft. The rules are clear." "Are they?" "Because I'm watching 3 of your pilots disobey orders to save a drowning man. I'm watching your formation fall apart because good people are starting to question bad orders. The rules aren't as clear as you think." The F-16 closed to visual range. Through his canopy, Jack could see the pilot. Older man, maybe Jack's age. Career officer. Probably flew in Desert Storm, same as Jack. 2 old warriors, about to kill each other for a general who'd sacrifice his own son. The absurdity of it almost made Jack laugh. "You want to shoot me down, Colonel?" Jack said. "Then do it. But know that when you do, you're not defending America. You're defending Marcus Hayes. There's a difference." Maxwell's voice, quieter now. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" "You don't. But 2 million people are watching us right now. When this is over, when the investigations start, when Congress and the Inspector General start asking questions, everyone will remember this moment. They'll remember you had a choice." Jack's fuel warning light illuminated. Empty. He had maybe 2 minutes of flight time left. "I'm out of gas, Colonel. In 2 minutes, I'm ditching this aircraft in the ocean. You don't have to shoot me down. Physics will do it for you. But if you fire that missile, everyone watching will know you murdered an unarmed man." The seconds stretched. Jack watched his fuel gauge tick toward 0. Then Maxwell spoke, voice heavy. "Rattlesnake 1 is RTB. All aircraft, break off. I'll take responsibility." Marcus Hayes' voice exploded over the radio. "Maxwell, if you disobey this order, I will have you court-martialed." "General," Maxwell said quietly, "I've served for 32 years. I've followed every order I've been given. But I took an oath to the Constitution, not to you. And right now, my oath says I don't shoot unarmed Americans." The remaining F-16CS turned away, heading home, leaving Jack and his dying fighter alone in the sky. The view counter hit 3 million. Jack's engine flamed out. The Su-57 went silent, became a glider, 30 tons of composites with nowhere to go but down. He aimed for a patch of open water, away from the ice floes. Got the aircraft level, reached for the ejection handle, then stopped. Because through his radio, cutting through every frequency, came a voice he hadn't heard in the chaos. "Sullivan, this is Warlock Actual. I'm inbound to your position." Marcus Hayes, flying personally, coming to finish what his pilots wouldn't. Jack felt something cold settle in his chest. This was always going to end here. 2 men, 2 philosophies, only one walking away. "General," Jack transmitted, "your pilots are watching. The world is watching. You really want to do this? You left me no choice." A single F-16 appeared on the horizon, afterburner blazing, missile rails loaded. Marcus Hayes coming to kill the man who'd exposed his crimes. Jack's Su-57 was at 5,000 feet now, gliding, dropping fast. He had maybe 90 seconds until water impact. No ejection seat in a glide would save him. He was trapped. Marcus's F-16 achieved missile lock. The tone screamed in Jack's helmet. "For Daniel," Marcus said. "For all the operations you compromised. For 30 years of friendship that you threw away." Jack's response was quiet. "I didn't throw it away, Marcus. You did. When you sacrificed your son, when you sold secrets, when you became everything we swore to fight against. I did what was necessary. You did what was easy." Jack's fighter dropped through 3,000 feet. There's a difference. The missile left the rail, AIM-9X Sidewinder, heat-seeking, terminal homing. No countermeasures. No evasion. Just death arriving at Mach 2. Jack pulled the ejection handle. The canopy blew. The seat fired. The world became wind and noise and sudden violent acceleration. Below him, the Sidewinder hit the Su-57, turned it into a fireball that briefly rivaled the sun. Above him, the parachute deployed, jerked him hard enough to dislocate his good shoulder. And through it all, the live stream kept broadcasting. 3.5 million people watching as Jack Sullivan floated down toward freezing water, watching as Marcus Hayes's F-16 circled overhead like a predator. The general could strafe him, could finish it, could eliminate the final witness. But 4 million people were watching now. News helicopters inbound. Coast Guard scrambling. Marcus had run out of shadows to hide in. Jack hit the water. The cold was a physical blow, drove the air from his lungs. His survival suit helped, but wouldn't save him. He had maybe 5 minutes before hypothermia made him unable to function. He floated, watching the sky, watching Marcus's F-16 circle overhead, waiting to see if the general would make him a martyr. Marcus's voice came one last time, quiet, almost human. "You destroyed me, Jack." "No, Marcus. You destroyed yourself. I just made sure everyone could see it." The F-16 turned east, heading back to base, heading toward arrest and courts-martial and the end of a career built on betrayal. Jack floated in freezing water, shoulders screaming, body shutting down, but alive. Through the fog of hypothermia, he heard rotor blades. A Coast Guard helicopter, orange against blue sky. Hands pulled him from the water, wrapped him in thermal blankets. Someone was talking to him, asking questions he couldn't quite process. He managed 3 words before consciousness left him. "Ben. Save Ben." The medic smiled. "Already did, sir. He's safe." Jack closed his eyes, let the darkness come, knowing that whatever happened next, he'd finally kept his promise. He hadn't left anyone behind. Jack Sullivan woke to the smell of antiseptic and the sound of machines keeping time with his heartbeat. The hospital room was standard military issue. White walls, fluorescent lights, a window showing anchorage spread below. Mountains beyond wearing their perpetual snow. He'd been in rooms like this before, after ejections and crashes and the accumulated violence of 3 decades in uniform. But this time felt different. This time, he'd chosen to be here. His left shoulder was immobilized, reconstructed after the ejection. Seat had torn ligaments and cracked bone. His right hand was bandaged where frostbite had blackened 2 fingers. IV lines fed antibiotics and painkillers into veins that had seen too many years and too much adrenaline. He was alive, somehow, against odds that should have killed him 3 times over. The door opened. A nurse entered, checked his vitals with practiced efficiency. She didn't speak until she'd finished her assessment, professional to the core. "You're awake," she said. "Good. You have visitors. A lot of visitors." "How long was I out?" 3 days. They had to warm you slowly. Hypothermia plus shock plus blood loss. The doctor said you should have died in the water. Jack tried to smile, tried and failed before. The nurse's expression softened. "There's a young man who's been here every day. Says he won't leave until you wake up. Captain Cooper." "Ben's alive?" "Alive and telling anyone who'll listen that you saved his life." The nurse adjusted his IV. "Your son called from Syria 6 times. He's trying to get emergency leave." Jack felt something crack in his chest. David, his Marine son, half a world away, probably watching the same live stream that 4 million others had witnessed, watching his father nearly die in a stolen Russian fighter. "Tell Ben he can come in," Jack said quietly. The young captain appeared moments later. Ben Cooper looked like he'd aged a decade in 3 days. Dark circles under his eyes, uniform rumpled, but alive, breathing, standing. "Sir," Ben said and his voice broke. "Sir, I'm so sorry. If I hadn't gone down, you wouldn't have had to." Jack cut him off. "You did exactly what you were supposed to do. You fought. You followed your conscience. You survived. Because you drew them away. Because you sacrificed yourself. I survived too, didn't I?" Jack shifted in the bed, pain shooting through his shoulder. "That's the trick, Captain. Making sure the sacrifice means something." Ben pulled up a chair, sat like a man carrying weight that shouldn't belong to someone his age. They arrested General Hayes. FBI took him into custody the moment he landed. He's being held at Joint Base Elmendorf, pending court-martial. "Good. Daniel's stable." They airlifted him to Anchorage Regional. Pneumonia and infection from the broken ribs, but the doctors say he'll recover. Ben paused. Rebecca and the kids are with him now. Jack closed his eyes, felt relief wash through him. "Tell me about the others, the prisoners, Kazakov's people." All the Russian POWs were repatriated, turned over to the embassy under diplomatic protocol. Kazakov and his Wagner soldiers left the country under an agreement with State Department. No charges filed in exchange for testimony about General Hayes. Ben's voice dropped. "Kazakov left you something, said to tell you that honorable enemies are rarer than friends." "What did he leave?" Ben handed over a small package. Jack opened it one-handed. Inside was a Russian pilot's wings. Old Soviet-era metal, worn smooth by decades, and a note in careful English. Colonel Sullivan, you taught me that some Americans still believe in honor. I hope I taught you that some Russians do as well. If we meet again, let it be as friends, not enemies. Dmitry Kazakov. Jack set the wings on his bedside table. Next to them, Ben placed something else. Daniel's wedding ring. He wanted you to have this, Ben said. Said you'd know what to do with it. Jack picked up the ring, felt its weight, thought about promises made and kept, about families torn apart and stitched back together, about the price of doing right when everything said to do wrong. I need to see him, Jack said. Daniel, I need to. The nurse said you shouldn't be moving. I've been lying still for 3 days. Jack started pulling out IV lines, ignoring the pain, ignoring the protests. Some things can't wait. Ben helped him into a wheelchair despite medical staff objections, helped him navigate corridors filled with reporters and military police and the general chaos of a scandal that had consumed the nation's attention for 72 hours. The news played on every screen they passed, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, all showing the same footage. Jack's Su-57 diving through missile fire, Marcus Hayes' F-16 circling the parachute, the moment when 38 American pilots chose conscience over command. The view count had reached 8 million. The hashtag General Hayes Traitor had been trending for 3 days straight. Congressional hearings were already scheduled. The Inspector General had opened 14 separate investigations. One man's choice had fractured a system built on secrets. Jack wondered if that made him a hero or just someone who'd finally run out of excuses. They found Daniel in a private room 2 floors down. Rebecca was there, holding her husband's hand while Michael and Sarah slept in chairs by the window. She looked up when Jack's wheelchair appeared, and her expression cycled through shock and relief and something that might have been gratitude. Colonel Sullivan, she whispered, careful not to wake the children. They told me what you did, how you saved him. I just brought him home, ma'am. He did the hard part. Daniel was awake, propped up on pillows, looking better than he had any right to after 4 weeks in Russian captivity and 3 days running for his life. His eyes found Jack, and something passed between them that needed no words. Jack wheeled closer. Ben helped him stand, supported his weight. Jack pulled Daniel's wedding ring from his pocket, held it out. I believe this belongs to you. Daniel took the ring, slipped it back on his finger. His hands were shaking. Thank you doesn't cover it, does it? No, Jack said, but it's a start. Rebecca stood, moved around the bed. Before Jack could react, she hugged him, careful of his injuries but fierce in her gratitude. You brought my husband back, she said into his shoulder. You brought him back when his own father wouldn't. We owe you everything. You owe me nothing, ma'am. Jack's voice was rough. Just raise those kids to know what their father went through to get home to them. Michael stirred, woke up, saw Jack standing there. The 10-year-old's eyes went wide. You're the pilot, Michael said. From the video, the one who fought all those planes. I'm the pilot who crashed into the ocean and needed saving, Jack corrected gently. Big difference. But you saved my dad. Your dad saved himself, son. I just helped him across the finish line. Sarah woke next, 7 years old and still young enough to see the world in simple terms. She looked at Jack with the absolute certainty that children have before life teaches them to doubt. Are you a hero, she asked. Jack thought about that question. About 34 years of following orders. About Sandstorm 6 dying because Jack had been too afraid to break them. About Daniel captured and tortured while his father filed paperwork declaring him dead. About the moment when doing right and doing good finally aligned. I'm just a man who made some hard choices, Jack said. Heroes are what we call people afterward, when we've had time to decide if the choices were right. Daniel's voice quiet but firm. They were right, Jack. Everything you did was right. Tell that to Marcus Hayes. The name hung in the air like cordite. Rebecca's expression hardened. Daniel's jaw clenched. Even the children seemed to sense the weight of it. He's going to prison, Rebecca said. The JAG prosecutors are bringing dozens of charges. Treason, espionage, attempted murder. They're saying it could be a capital case. Jack nodded slowly. He'd thought about this. About the man Marcus Hayes had been versus what he'd become. About how 3 years in a Hanoi prison camp could break something fundamental in a person's soul. He was a good officer once, Jack said. Before Hanoi. Before the POW camp taught him that survival meant sacrificing everything else. Rebecca's voice was steel. He sacrificed his own son. There's no excuse for that. No, Jack agreed, there's not. But maybe there's an explanation. That doesn't make it right. Nothing makes it right, ma'am. But understanding why evil happens might help us prevent the next one. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of moral philosophy too heavy for a hospital room. Then Michael spoke up, breaking the tension with a child's directness. Mr. Sullivan, are you going to get in trouble too for stealing the plane and fighting the Air Force? Jack smiled despite the pain. Probably, son, probably a lot of trouble. But you were doing the right thing. Sometimes doing the right thing means accepting the consequences. Daniel shifted in his bed, grimaced through the pain of broken ribs. They're not going to court-martial you, Jack. The public outcry would be massive. You're a national hero. I'm a colonel who stole an enemy aircraft, disobeyed direct orders, and engaged American forces. Jack's voice carried no bitterness, just acceptance. There are consequences for that, even when the reasons are sound. The door opened. A uniformed officer entered, Army JAG insignia on his collar. Major Thomas Richardson. He carried a briefcase and the careful expression of a lawyer dealing with a case that had international implications. Colonel Sullivan, the major said, I need to inform you that you're under investigation by the Judge Advocate General's office. You're restricted to base pending the outcome of multiple inquiries. Understood, Jack said. However, Richardson's expression softened slightly. I'm also here to inform you that the Secretary of Defense has personally intervened. You're being recommended for the Medal of Honor. The President wants to present it himself. Jack felt the absurdity of it wash over him. Court-martial on one hand, Medal of Honor on the other. The military's way of saying, we don't know what to do with you. Tell the President thank you, but I don't need a medal. Sir, with respect, you don't get to decline. Richardson pulled documents from his briefcase. Your actions saved American lives, exposed corruption at the highest levels, and demonstrated moral courage under impossible circumstances. That's exactly what the Medal of Honor is for. I violated every regulation in the book. You violated regulations to uphold the values those regulations are supposed to protect. Richardson set the papers on Jack's lap. There's a difference, Colonel. The Board of Inquiry understands that. What about the charges? The major's smile was slight but genuine. Hard to court-martial someone when 8 million people watched him risk everything to do the right thing. The charges are being quietly filed away. You'll get a letter of reprimand in your permanent record. Nothing more. Jack looked at the papers, at the official language, trying to make sense of choices that defied bureaucratic categorization. What about Captain Cooper and the Wagner soldiers who helped us? Cooper's receiving a reprimand as well. No court-martial. As for the Russian contractors, they're covered under the diplomatic agreement. Richardson paused. Though I'm told Colonel Kazakov is being considered for some kind of civilian honor by the State Department. Apparently saving American prisoners counts for something. Even when those prisoners were held illegally by our own CIA, especially then, sir. After the major left, Jack sat with Daniel's family for another hour. They talked about small things. Michael's baseball team, Sarah's upcoming piano recital, the new house Rebecca was looking at closer to base so Daniel wouldn't have such a long commute. Normal things, family things, the kind of conversation that mattered more than medals or investigations or the weight of history. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with Jack. Ben wheeled him back to his room, helped him into bed, made sure the nurses were satisfied he wouldn't immediately escape again. Get some rest, sir, Ben said. Tomorrow the real circus starts. Press conferences, debriefs, congressional testimony. Looking forward to it, Jack lied. Ben paused at the door. Sir, I wanted to ask. My father, Sandstorm 6. Do you think he'd be proud of what I did? Jack thought about Robert Cooper, about a young pilot who died following orders 34 years ago, about how his son had survived by breaking them. I think your father would be proud that you learned from his death, that you made sure his sacrifice taught you something. That's all any of us can ask. Ben nodded, satisfied, and left. Jack lay in the dark, listening to machines beep and whir, thought about the long road that had led here. Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan. 1,000 missions where following orders had been the right thing because the orders had been right. And one mission where they weren't. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. He almost deleted it, then saw the message. Colonel Sullivan, this is Colonel Maxwell, 354th Fighter Wing. I wanted you to know that what you did out there, standing up when it mattered, it reminded me why I joined. Why any of us joined. Thank you for that. And I'm sorry I almost killed you. Jack smiled, typed back one-handed. Colonel Maxwell, you made the right call when it counted. That's all that matters. Stay safe up there. More texts came in. From pilots he'd trained decades ago. From officers he'd served with. From people he'd never met who'd watched the live stream and wanted to say thank you. 8 million viewers had become 8 million witnesses, and in witnessing, they'd held power accountable. Jack set the phone down, closed his eyes, and for the first time in 34 years, slept without nightmares. 6 months later, the ceremony took place on a perfect Alaska morning. Joint Base Elmendorf. Richardson's parade ground was packed. 2,000 airmen in dress blues, civilians from Anchorage and beyond, news cameras from every major network. The President of the United States, flanked by Secret Service, waiting to drape a blue ribbon around an old pilot's neck. Jack stood at attention despite the pain still lingering in his shoulder. His dress uniform felt tight after months of physical therapy and recovery. The ribbons on his chest told the story of a career that had spanned 3 decades and 4 wars. Today would add one more. Daniel Hayes stood nearby, fully recovered, back on flight status. Rebecca and the kids were in the front row. Ben Cooper was there in dress blues, recently promoted to major despite the letter of reprimand. Kazakov had sent a message, couldn't attend for obvious diplomatic reasons, but his words were read aloud. Tell Colonel Sullivan that he has earned the respect of warriors on both sides of old divides. That is worth more than any medal. The citation was read by a 4-star general who'd flown with Jack in Desert Storm. The words painted a picture of heroism that felt both accurate and incomplete. How did you capture in official language the moment when a man finally chose conscience over command? The president stepped forward, the Medal of Honor in his hands, the highest military decoration, awarded for conspicuous gallantry at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. Jack had seen these ceremonies before, had stood in formation while better men received honors they'd often not lived to see. He'd never imagined standing here himself. Colonel Sullivan, the president said, his voice carrying across the parade ground, your actions 6 months ago reminded this nation what service truly means. Not blind obedience, not unquestioning loyalty, but the moral courage to stand for what's right, even when doing so costs everything. The medal settled around Jack's neck, heavy with symbolism and history. The president stepped back, saluted. Jack returned it, the gesture as natural as breathing after 30 years. But then the president did something unexpected. He gestured to someone in the crowd. A young man in marine dress blues stood, walked to the platform. Captain David Sullivan, Jack's son, home from Syria on emergency leave that had been extended for this moment. Father and son faced each other. David's eyes were wet, but his bearing was marine straight, proud and unbreakable. Dad, David said quietly, just for Jack to hear. You always told me that doing the right thing meant being willing to pay the price. I never really understood what you meant until I watched you choose to pay it. Jack's throat tightened. I'm sorry you had to watch that, son. Don't be. David pulled something from his pocket, a small box. I'm proud to have watched it. Proud that when the moment came, my father chose to be the man he'd always taught me to be. He opened the box. Inside was a pair of pilot's wings. Old, tarnished, the kind issued in the 1990s. Sandstorm 6, David said. Captain Robert Cooper. I contacted his widow. She wanted you to have these. Said her husband would have wanted the man who finally learned his lesson to carry them. Jack took the wings with shaking hands. Robert Cooper's wings, the wingman he'd failed to save, the ghost that had haunted him for 34 years, now laid to rest by an act of redemption. Thank you, Jack whispered. The ceremony continued, speeches were made, honors were rendered. The base commander announced that the 90th Fighter Squadron was being renamed the Sullivan Squadron in Jack's honor. Jack thought that was excessive, but didn't argue. Afterward, there was a reception at the Officers Club. Jack found himself surrounded by well-wishers and reporters and politicians who wanted to be photographed with the hero of the hour. He endured it for an hour, then escaped to the flight line. The F-22 Raptors sat in their revetments, sleek and deadly, the most advanced fighters in the world. Jack had been flying them for 20 years, had taught hundreds of pilots how to wring every ounce of performance from their airframes. But he'd never fly one again. The ejection had done too much damage. His shoulder would never handle the G-forces. His body was done with combat aviation. He was okay with that. Someone approached from behind. Jack turned, found Daniel standing there in his dress uniform, walking without the limp that had plagued him for months. They told me I'd find you here, Daniel said. Old habits, Jack replied. When things get too loud, head for the flight line. Daniel stood beside him, both of them looking at the aircraft that had defined their careers. I got my new assignment, Daniel said. They're making me deputy commander of the squadron. Your squadron now, apparently. You'll do good work. I'll try to live up to the name. Daniel was quiet for a moment. My father's trial starts next month. They're saying life in prison, minimum, maybe death penalty. Jack had followed the proceedings. Marcus Hayes had been charged with treason, espionage, conspiracy, attempted murder. The evidence was overwhelming. The live stream had left no room for denial. How do you feel about that? Jack asked. Daniel's jaw worked. He's my father. Part of me still loves him. Still remembers him teaching me to fly, teaching me about duty and honor and sacrifice. But the man who did those things isn't the same man who sent me to die. People change, Jack said. Sometimes the pressure breaks them in ways that can't be fixed. Doesn't excuse it, no, but maybe it explains it. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. Jack, Daniel said finally, thank you for everything, for saving me, for exposing him, for showing me what real honor looks like. You would have done the same, maybe, but you did it first. A jet took off from the far runway, an F-15 climbing into the evening sky. The sound was pure and clean, the sound of freedom and power and controlled violence. Jack had spent 30 years chasing that sound. Now it was time to let someone else chase it. I'm retiring, he said. Officially, no more postponements. What will you do? I don't know. Jack smiled. For the first time in 30 years, I genuinely don't know. And that feels right. David appeared walking across the tarmac in his Marine uniform. Behind him came Ben Cooper, and behind Ben, a dozen pilots from the squadron Jack had served with over the years. They gathered on the flight line, an impromptu reunion of warriors who'd learned that orders and morality weren't always aligned. Someone had brought beer. Someone else had brought whiskey. They stood in the fading light, swapping stories and lies, in the kind of truth that only came out among the people who'd seen too much and survived anyway. Jack found himself next to Elder David Iapana, who'd come down from what was left of Little Diomede Island. We're rebuilding, David said. The government gave us funds, new houses, new community center. We'll never get back what was lost, but we'll make something new. That's all any of us can do, Jack said. The elder held up a small carving, traditional Yupik artwork. An eagle, wings spread, rising from waves. For you, Colonel, to remember that sometimes we fall so we can learn to fly again. Jack took the carving, felt its weight. Thank you. As the night deepened, as the stories flowed and the bonds strengthened, Jack Sullivan looked around at the people he'd saved and who'd saved him in return. Daniel, alive against all odds, on his way to becoming the officer his father should have been. Ben Cooper, learning that conscience mattered more than commands, carrying his father's legacy forward. David Sullivan, his son, the Marine who'd watched his father nearly die and understood why it mattered. The pilots who'd chosen to break formation rather than kill an unarmed man. The millions who'd watched and witnessed and held power accountable. All of it because one old pilot had finally learned the lesson that Sandstorm 6 had died trying to teach him 34 years ago. Some things are worth dying for, but more things are worth living for. Jack raised his glass, and the others followed suit. To the fallen, he said, to the saved, to the choices that define us. They drank, and in that moment, on a flight line in Alaska with the Northern Lights beginning their nightly dance overhead, Jack Sullivan finally made peace with 34 years of ghosts. He'd spent a career learning to fight, learning to follow orders, learning to be a good soldier. It had taken him until the end to learn how to be a good man. But he'd learned it, and that was enough. The next morning, Jack woke early. His shoulder ached despite the painkillers. His frostbitten fingers throbbed with phantom cold. He was 52 years old and felt 70. He put on civilian clothes for the first time in 3 decades. Jeans, a flannel shirt, boots that weren't military issue. Looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. His phone rang. Unknown number, he answered. Colonel Sullivan? A woman's voice, professional and warm. This is Mary Cooper, Robert's widow, Captain Ben Cooper's mother. Ma'am, Jack said, his chest tightening, I'm so glad Ben reached out to you about the wings. The wings are important, Mary said, but that's not why I'm calling. I wanted to tell you something I never got the chance to say 34 years ago. Jack waited. Robert talked about you the night before his last mission. Said you were the best pilot he'd ever flown with. Said if anything happened to him, he knew you'd take care of his family. Mary's voice caught. You did more than that, Colonel. You made sure his death taught you how to live. That's the greatest honor you could have given him. Jack's throat closed. I'm sorry I didn't save him, ma'am. You saved his son, and in doing so, you saved yourself. Mary paused. Robert would have called that a fair trade. After they hung up, Jack stood in his small apartment, surrounded by 30 years of accumulated life in the military, and realized he had no idea what came next. No briefings, no missions, no formations. Just life, plain and simple and terrifyingly open. He walked outside into the Alaska morning. The air was clean and cold. The mountains stood eternal. And somewhere overhead, a fighter jet painted contrails across blue sky. Jack watched it climb, watched it disappear into the sun, and smiled. His flying days were over. His war was done. But his life, the real one he'd been putting off for 34 years, was finally ready to begin. He thought about Sandstorm 6, about Daniel Hayes, about Ben Cooper and David Sullivan, and all the pilots who'd learned that doing right sometimes meant breaking rules. Thought about Marcus Hayes in a cell, waiting for judgment that would never absolve him. Thought about Kazakov, somewhere in Russia, reunited with his son. Thought about 8 million people who'd watched one old pilot choose conscience over command and maybe, just maybe, learn something about what real courage looked like. And then Jack Sullivan, Medal of Honor recipient, retired colonel, survivor of his own choices, did something he hadn't done in longer than he could remember. He let go of the guilt, let go of the ghosts, let go of the weight he'd been carrying since a desert sky in 1991, and walked forward into whatever came next, finally and completely free. The end. Brothers, I spent weeks researching real military protocols to tell Jack Sullivan's story right. That moment when he had to choose between the order and the wingman? That's the choice too many of you faced in '91, in Iraq, in Afghanistan. Some of you followed orders and lived with regret. Some broke them and paid the price. Either way, you know that weight. Drop a comment. What would you have done in Jack's position? And if this story hit home, there are 47 more missions waiting for you on this channel. Your brothers are watching. Will you join them? Hit subscribe. We don't leave anyone behind here.